Wait!
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. And before we get into this one, let me just say off the rip that this video might be one that makes a few people upset. And I understand that going in. So if at any point during the video you do get upset, remember these two things. Number one, let your voice be heard. The comment section is there for a reason. If you disagree with something I've said, leave a convincing argument in the comments below. And number two, hear me out. If you click off this video, you don't even know what I'm gonna be saying. You could even agree by the end of it. You don't know. So just remember those two things going forward. Now let's talk about the Chibnall Era. If you guys don't know, earlier this week I dropped a video talking about, shocker, Doctor Who. And while it was quite a long one, due to the structure of it and everything, I wasn't able to say in it everything I wanted to say. I even left an addendum at the end of the video saying that I wanted to do a follow-up. So I thought I'd make a follow-up. A follow-up going over in detail all of my thoughts and my feelings. But of course this one's going to be a lot more chill, a lot more relaxed, you know what I'm saying? I'm just going to lay it all out on the table. What I like, what I don't like, and everything in between. I'm just going to talk about Doctor Who, guys, you know how it is. So far, I haven't had the chance to talk about this era at all on my channel, outside of brief snippets. And I feel like now is the perfect chance. So, get your popcorn, sit back and relax, and let's talk some Doctor Who. Okay, so up first we're going to be talking about the music. This is the main thing that I wanted to talk about in my last video, but just couldn't, man. And there were a couple reasons for that. The main one being, of course, copyright. I hate to break the fourth wall, guys, but this is a real thing you've got to consider while making videos. The BBC is copyright heavy. They love spamming that shit. So of course when showing music of Doctor Who, that can be a little bit murky. And I'd already put so much work into that video, you know, I didn't want to have it get taken down, which happened anyway, twice. But it's up now, which is all that matters. And I've got an opportunity to talk about the music. So let's talk about the music. Sagan Akinola is the main composer for series 11, 12 and 13. And he has big shoes to fill, let me just say that. Another one of the main reasons why I didn't really press on this topic so much in the actual video, I did mention it, but not as much as I would want to, and I'm going to now. The reason is because I didn't want to make it come down to comparing between Sagan Akinola and Murray Gold. I wanted to avoid that basically at all costs, but it's really hard to bring up the pros of Sagan Akinola, who I do feel is incredibly overlooked. I think he's incredibly talented and I love his work. But it's really hard to do that without bringing up the past, because you know the classic rebuttal will be, oh well, maybe it is okay, but it isn't as good as what came before. I think in its own way, it is as good as what came before. I really like it, and it is such a different style. And that was the main thing I wanted to get across in my previous video, and the main thing I want to get across now, because I love the Chibnall Era, and a lot of people, let's just say, they aren't quite as fond of it. Let's just say that. And for years now, I've been trying to theorize why that might be the case, because I understand a bunch of people, they'll just come in, they'll mainly say, the writing's bad, bro. Bad writing, bro. But like, come on, it can't all be just that. I mean, like, what are we saying? The Eaters of Light is just on a whole other level compared to Rosa? Is that what we're saying? And you know, after doing some psychoanalysis, psychomantis, I feel pretty confident in my assessment that a big reason why a lot of people say this era doesn't feel like Doctor Who in quotation marks is that the music is different. This isn't just limited to Doctor Who. Music in any show is key to its identity. I mean, think about Star Wars without the music. Just not the same. And to a lot of people, Doctor Who is in that similar vein. A lot of people don't realize that the music of Doctor Who goes far beyond the start of New Who. There's a whole bunch of different styles. But of course, music is incredibly subjective, so I'm not going to be ranking one above the other. Now, I do have my certain opinions on each series album that has released since around, was it in 2006 that the first one released? I think it was. And I could save those for another video, because I think you can talk about music to an extent without just saying, oh, you know, all subjective, But at the same time, it's really difficult to definitively put one thing above the other. It basically does just come down to what I said in my previous video, which is I know what I like and I know what sounds make my brain happy. And I do think it is a subconscious thing. It's on a subconscious level, the music, when it comes to Series 11 especially. There is such a drastic change from the Murray Gold style. And again, I have to refute the claim that it's all cool ambience. It just isn't. There are so many incredible tracks that no one has heard of. Guys, the Spyfall soundtrack is fucking fire, bro. Listen to that shit. Dun-dun, dun-dun. We're in a fucking James Bond film. Bro, that shit goes crazy. But a lot of people just don't listen to the soundtracks. I mean, that's what it came down to in my previous video, you know, like a shameless plug and all that. But in that video, what I was basically talking about is the phenomena that a bunch of people just jump on the bandwagon and they regurgitate and spew the exact same points over and over again. And one of those points would be that Sega Nakanola's soundtrack is mid and it's all ambience. It just isn't the case. It's a different style. That's what it comes down to at the end of the day. And they are markedly different. Of course, Sega Nakanola does have a few throwbacks to Murray Gold's theme, like in his Cyberman theme, there's that little bit of the Murray Gold, you know what I'm talking about. In fact, I would say that the soundtrack for the Series 12 finale is one of the best soundtracks for any Doctor Who episode ever. But then again, when it comes down to that finale, I mean, we're gonna talk about it later, guys. You already know I'm gonna get into that. But just a little sneak peek into my thoughts on the episode. I think technically, from a visual, from a musical, from a performance standpoint, from everything apart from the actual twist itself, I think the episode is amazing. But damn. But we're talking about music. What are the differences between the two? Well, for one, Murray Gold is very bombastic, way over the top. He's basically carrying the scenes. Even the showrunners admit this. Not that it's necessarily a bad thing, it's just a part of the creative progress.
Fast at the same time, it's got to be fun and vigorous. There is no other show with a tone like that. So I don't know how you do that without music.
Yeah. Yeah, imagine the modern show without music. It would just be...
well, we've seen it. It's death.
Yes, that's true. In the early cuts that you watch, you're like, oh, we're going to need score on this.
Oh, Murray! Get Murray on the phone now. Could he hum in the corner?
The music is the blood of the show. Murray Gold's Doctor theme, the Dalek theme, the editor put a third theme in here that I forgot about. Fuck you. And especially now, 10, 15 years onwards from the start of the show, understandably, a lot of people are really nostalgic for these themes. But something which I find crazy, now this is just me, but a lot of people say the reason they don't like Sega Nakanola's songs is because they don't remember them, as if the Murray Gold soundtracks aren't from episodes that you've rewatched a million times. I would say that 90% of people who really don't like the Chibnall Era are people who watched it on broadcast and not so much afterwards. In which case, you haven't watched the episode enough to really remember the soundtrack. You were nostalgic for Murray Gold's soundtrack because it came out a long time ago. Sega Nakanola's soundtrack is relatively recent. Of course you're not nostalgic for it yet. And before people get me twisted, I'm not saying that people only like Murray Gold for nostalgia. What I am saying is that the nostalgia does enhance your enjoyment of the track, which is then why it's unfair to use that nostalgia to put it above Sega Nakanola's tracks when, technically speaking, they're incredible pieces of work. Especially the soundtracks for each major villain. Let's see if I can get away with playing a few comparisons here. This one's the Master theme. This is the Cyberman theme. This is the Dalek theme. And this is the Doctor theme. Do you see what I mean? They're different, but it's not bad. But again, those subconscious triggers are the things that make people call the Star Beast, which by all accounts is about the same quality as a regular episode in the Chibnall Era, seem so much more like Doctor Who to so many people, just from the first scene. It's Murray Gold's soundtrack. It makes the show familiar to people who started with the 2005 version of the show. Of course, I've heard soundtracks from all manner of decades. The Survival soundtrack, the Resurrection of the Daleks soundtrack, the Web of Fear soundtrack, the Terror of the Autons soundtrack, man. I think part of the reason why I didn't mind the composer change so much is because I was already so used to so many different styles of music already in Doctor Who. Whereas, of course, to a regular viewer who's only ever heard Murray Gold doing Doctor Who, it's a lot more jarring. Did that make sense? I hope that made sense. But let's talk about something else that I didn't manage to get to in the video, which is Series 13. Can you believe it? A whole series I didn't get around to talking about. But can you really blame me? Series 12 is of course the big lore, in quotation marks, series. And there's a lot there that needs to be gone over. And even then, I didn't even talk about Captain Jack returning. And Series 11 is of course the start, the first impression, which is definitely the most important. Although I will concede a good ending is also really necessary. But Series 13, with its status as a mini-series, kind of just fell by the wayside. I briefly mentioned that I enjoyed it, and I briefly mentioned that I enjoyed most of the episodes in it. But outside of that, I never really got to delve deep into it. And it's not just here. Even in my tier list ranking for this series, my video dedicated only to this series, it's by far my shortest one. I really didn't go into it that much, which is funny, because if you guys know me, you know that my obsession with this series is borderline a little concerning. I think it's impossible to mention Series 13 without the context of the time. I mean, it's called Flux because people's lives were in flux because of a pandemic, right? That's why it's called Flux. The flux is a metaphor for COVID, right? It comes in and wipes everything out. It's a virus. They literally call it a virus in the show. Maybe I'm getting it wrong. That's just what I thought about it. And of course, it's not just in the actual text. It's also the whole context around the show and why the show looks like that, why the show's formatted like that. Of course, it's a miracle that Flux was even made in the first place, which I will go into. But also the context for me watching it, because at the time, Doctor Who was like the only thing that I had going for me. And I think many people were in the same boat. Life was just fucking shit, man. And so it was good to have my favorite show be back on the air. Was there stuff I liked? Yeah, there was stuff I loved. Was there stuff that I thought was incredibly terrible? Yeah, of course there was. But I think overall, I'm just so incredibly grateful for the experience, because in reality, it's basically everything I've ever wanted from Doctor Who, which is a six-parter. Do you know how much I've wanted a modern Doctor Who six-parter? If you guys know me, you know I am a massive classic Doctor Who fan, and not just that, I'm a massive fan of the format of classic Doctor Who, because it is so superior to the format of modern Doctor Who. It is inconceivable. The 45-minute format I have described in the past as the enemy of modern Doctor Who, because it just is, man. And you may be looking at me funny, you may be thinking, what is he talking about? But think about this one, okay? How many of your favorite stories are not a part of a two-parter? How many? Think about them right now. Think about your top 10 stories. I would imagine that at least half of them are two-parters. And outside of about 10 really solid ones, really solid exceptions to the rule, the rest of the single-parters normal episodes do not break into your top 30. But why is that? Why is an episode like The Human Nature and the Family of Blood more loved and better, in my opinion, than The Shakespeare Code? Well, it's the format. The Shakespeare Code has 45 minutes. Human Nature and the Family of Blood have 90. They have double the amount of time to tell their story. And you may be looking at me saying, why does that even matter? Well, it's because Doctor Who is meant for long-form storytelling. The ideal format for Doctor Who, and I will forever stand by this, is 4 20-minute episodes. That is the standard. Yes, there are 6-parters. Yes, there are 3-parters. Yes, there are 2-parters. Yes, there are 10-parters. There are even 12-parters, and those are all good. But the average Doctor Who story is 4 parts, 20 minutes long each. And the show is made for that formula. Even the modern series, each story, more or less, yes, on average, is meant to fill 90 to 100 minutes, which is why you'll have so many single-parter episodes in Doctor Who that feel like they have a big idea, but not enough time to execute it. In fact, you could say that about literally all 4 of the most recent episodes, especially the Star Beast, man. Don't even get me started. If the Star Beast was a 2-parter, or God forbid a 3-parter, and the 60th anniversary was actually telling one story, do you think it would be better? It would be better. Because Doctor Who is just meant for that format. And yes, there are exceptions. Midnight, Dalek, I love those episodes, okay? And I'm not saying that the 45-minute format can't be great for television, and of course it is necessary because that's the slot of time they need to fill on BBC One. But think about it on average. How many misses do you get per hit? And of course by misses I mean misses relative to the hits of Doctor Who. I would say that on average, even the most mediocre of episodes in New Who are far above basically anything else that is on TV at the time, especially British TV. But what I'm trying to say is that it's pretty damn noticeable that the 2-parters are better than the 1-parters. And that's because Doctor Who is meant for that format. Okay, rant out of the way. Now back to Flux. Do you see why I like having 6 parts now? Now of course, ironically, this series also struggles from not having enough time, with its incredibly rushed ending that we will go over in just a second. It's very funny. But it meant that I got to tune in every week with a new cliffhanger, with bated breath, enjoying one long story. And in 2021, the height of COVID, that was basically all I wanted. So yes, long story short, I am a proud Fluxer. I love the Flux. Comment below if you love the Flux. But why? Why is Flux so fun, outside of the meta elements of the show? Well, I think it all comes down to Dan. John Bishop's Dan is a shining star, a guiding light, in that he's just a nice guy, innit? You know, sometimes I can just be satisfied seeing the dynamics between characters and just have a fun time, sit back, relax and enjoy myself. Dan is a uniter in the fandom. Both people who like and people who don't like the Chibnall Era can all come to agree that Dan is good. And also I just love how inventive this series is. There are so many unique ideas per episode. It's so different to anything I could have ever theorized it being, could have ever imagined it being. I love every single element of Flux. I love it all. And the reason I specifically say that, the reason I specifically bring up the elements of Flux, is because actually a couple years ago I attempted to do a rewrite of Flux. And actually it wasn't even just an attempt. I did do it. Yeah, it was a mad undertaking, but I did take aside, I think it was, what is it, like 8 days? And I rewrote the whole series in a similar manner to how I did in my Revolution of the Daleks rewrite video, which you should check out, by the way, it's really good. And of course, in doing that project, I had to read the scripts of Flux, and oh boy, did I enjoy it. If you enjoy reading scripts, trust me, just head over to the writer's room on the Doctor Who website. I think it's even on iPlayer now. They updated it, it's amazing. You can read all of the scripts of the Chibnall Era. They've all been released there, but Series 13 especially, oh my goodness, these are so endearing. There's so much stuff in here that doesn't even make it to the actual show, and it is so funny. Chris Chibnall, I love you. And of course, in doing this project, I was really able to dissect and analyze all of what worked and what didn't work about Flux, and all of the moving pieces, and how difficult it is to create a 6-part storyline with all of the limitations they had, which we'll get into in a second. And as I say, it really gave me a newfound admiration and understanding, boosting my enjoyment of this series to even greater heights. I don't think technically it's one of the best Doctor Who series, but out of Modern Who, especially recently, I mean, there is a kind of element of recency bias in there, but I must admit it has risen the ranks to become one of my favorites. It's just so enjoyable. Now, is it good though? You see, that's a whole other matter, and I kind of want to get into that in a second. I'm bringing up a bunch of stuff and I'm kind of pushing it to the side, but as you guys can see, it's a long ass video, okay, I've got time. Before I talk about the actual contents of Flux, I kind of want to go over it in a meta sense, and why Flux as a whole, and the specials as well actually, I'll bunch them all together, why Series 13 had such a large impact on the fandom consensus. The fandom consensus is a concept that I brought up in my previous video. It's basically the words I use to describe the general opinions held by the fans. There is such a thing as a fandom consensus, which is pretty much a fancy way of saying opinion which most people agree on. And I think it's only natural. This isn't limited to Doctor Who, by the way, not even slightly. Every fandom will collectivize at some point, albeit not to a complete degree. And I'm not saying it's wholly a bad thing. A fandom consensus can help the creatives see what people on the whole like, see what people on the whole don't. Seeing what's popular and what's not is genuinely really helpful. But like everything in life, it can be taken to an extreme. And that is what I'm seeing right now. It's kind of like a diaspora. I explain it in a lot more detail and a lot more depth in my previous video, which hopefully you guys should have all watched anyway, but if you haven't, I would highly recommend it. But anyway, what does Series 13 have to do with this? Everything, at least in my opinion. I mentioned earlier that first impressions are important, but also I did concede that endings are pretty much equally so. And Series 13 was not the ending that Chris Chibnall hoped it to be. The restrictions put upon Series 13 sound hellish. From everything I've heard behind the scenes, it's almost cartoonish how limited it was. From some reports, I heard you couldn't have more than 4 people on screen at a time in a set. Maybe it was even 3 at one point. And of course, everyone had to be socially distanced and they had to use glass panes to keep people away from each other. Famously, the shot from episode 3, I think it is, Once Upon a Time, that features Jo Martin, where the 13th Doctor looks at a reflection of herself and sees Jo Martin looking back. It's actually a glass wall, and that is just Jo Martin there standing looking at her, and they're using the glass wall because it's COVID, right, to block them apart, but also to keep them shooting together because they were in separate bubbles or whatever. Oh my god, it's so dystopian. That really was just the worst time, huh? Chris Chibnall doesn't do interviews that much. I really wish I could do one with him. I think that would be amazing. But in the brief comments he has given, it seems to be incredibly hard. And the truth is, he saved Doctor Who. It could have ended right there. Could have ended in 2017 as well, to be fair. But both times, Chris Chibnall swooped in and did all he could to save the show. Love him or hate him, the guy has the skills needed to be showrunner. Maybe you can dislike him as a writer, maybe you can dislike him as a person, although I don't know why you'd ever do that, he's a great guy. But the guy has credentials as a showrunner, and he knows how to keep it going, which he did through the toughest time. This is probably the second toughest time in the show's history, the second most turbulent after 1985, is what I would probably say is the toughest time in the show's history before this. Of course, the show did get cancelled in 1989, but I feel like that decision was actually because of the repercussions of 1985, if that makes sense. If you actually look at the history, Doctor Who's death warrant was sealed the moment it was put on hiatus. And a similar thing could have happened here. From Chris Chibnall's own testimony, it was apparently really uncertain if Doctor Who was going to come back ever. And he fought hard to make sure that it did come back. From what I've heard, the deadlines were also pretty hellish, which makes why the finale ended up the way that it did make a little more sense. Speaking from experience trying to juggle all of those plot elements, making a satisfying conclusion when you can't have all of the characters you want to have together in the same room is practically impossible. I'm probably never going to release those scripts because I kind of just like having them for myself, but I will say the way that I did it was I had the finale be a multi-Doctor story between, of course, the fugitive Doctor and the actual Doctor. And of course, in my version of it, I had to bring in Sacha Dhawan's Master as well. So he was kind of not like a final boss, but he was like an intermediary between the Doctor and Swarm and Azure, because of course, you couldn't have all of them in the same room at the same time. Keep in mind, this was written before Power of the Doctor came out, so I didn't know Sacha Dhawan's Master was going to come back ever. I guessed he would, but it would have been so amazing to see him in Flux. I think that's probably my biggest missed opportunity. I wish they'd done that. In fact, that's probably why I even decided to rewrite the series in the first place. It was a really fun exercise. I would definitely recommend to all of you creative people in the audience, if you enjoy writing scripts, doing a Doctor Who rewrite, just having a chill fun time, it's a really fulfilling experience. I love it. But anyway, Series 13 in the context of the wider show should be seen as an achievement. And yet it's not. In the wider fandom, people don't look at the context. They don't look that it came out in coronavirus times. What they look at is people were calling the Chibnall Era shit, and then it looks like like Series 13 is really quite cheap. I think the main thing I remember was when the Halloween Apocalypse came out, and of course there's that first scene where they're in that green screen land area and then they fly around like on witches' brooms. And I remember when that episode came out, a bunch of people were clowning on the show. They were like, yeah, Jodie Whittaker's ass, etc, Chibnall Era bad. From an outsider's perspective, from someone who doesn't know about the coronavirus stuff, about someone who only heard the negativity coming from the Chibnall Era, people screaming Chibnall bad, Chibnall bad, Chibnall bad. To them, they don't see a fun, light-hearted throwback to Doctor Who's roots. What they see is a cheap pile of garbage, which doesn't really do well for the Chibnall Era's reputation, especially when one of the main selling points for the first two series was just how incredibly it looked visually. And I still think to an extent Series 13 does look great, especially the Village of Angels. That one is just a real standout, both visually and just as an episode. But especially when you look at the finale and there are certain shots in there which, I mean, probably due to COVID restrictions, just weren't actually as good, and the editing gets a little bit choppy, etc, etc. It is not as well produced as some of the earlier series, which is only natural in a time where there is so many limitations being put on the crew. But again, as I mentioned, people aren't going to see that context, or at least people didn't back then. To a lot of people, Series 13 is a dud note to end on, whereas to me, I really enjoy it. And because again, a lot of people don't have the goodwill with the Chibnall Era to be able to laugh along at some of the poor editing or the carving Easter gags, etc, etc. Again, while I enjoy it, they think it's a joke. And with the finale of the series being really quite confusing, I think that's another one of the big detriments to Flux. It leaves viewers off with a bad note, and when the reputation of the era is already probably on the decline, I would say, it's not exactly what you want. But of course, the response that a lot of people would have to that is, that's not really fair. This isn't the Series 13 that they wanted to make. If Chris Chibnall had the same amount of resources that he did for the previous series, he probably would have made an absolute banger of a series. Not that Flux isn't a banger, but I mean like something genuinely really incredible. I see the vision. I see where we can go from after the Timeless Children. There's a lot of really cool stuff that we can get into there. And instead, because everything was thrown into Flux, haha, get it? It leaves the latter half of this era feeling really disjointed and disconnected, and it doesn't really flow as seamlessly from episode to episode as I would say Series 11 to 12 does. In fact, I would say that the Chibnall Era can be split in and of itself into two smaller mini eras, which is pre-COVID and post-COVID, and they don't really gel, should I say. Revolution of the Daleks is so different to the Halloween Apocalypse. Obviously they're not like different shows or anything, and there is a clear through line there, but in terms of like style, pace, even writing, I'd say there is a stark difference. And visually you notice it too. The specials as well really tie into this feeling of disjointedness. There's no through line between them either, apart from the Phasmin stuff, which, I mean, we'll get into that in a bit. What this segment of the video was trying to talk about is more so the reputation of the series, and how having Series 13 be the one to cap off the era subconsciously enforces a negative bias, if you know what I'm saying. Because that was how we ended, people kind of feel like the whole era was that same level, when in reality it's quite different. But let me leave you with this, a different viewpoint, fresh eyes, should I say. If you are someone who thinks about this era really negatively, maybe this change in viewpoint might let you ease up a little bit. For a long time now, the Jodie Whittaker era was the most recent of Doctor Who. It was the part of Doctor Who that was coming out currently. It was a new thing. This is where we are up to right now. If you can believe it, at one point Legends of the Sea Devils was the most recent episode of Doctor Who to have come out. And now of course, that time has passed. We are now entering a new era, Rusty Davies 2, and soon we will be in the midst of season 1, and then soon after that season 2, and hopefully season 3, series 16, etc, etc. Until at some point in the not too distant future, we will be looking back at the Jodie Whittaker era from quite a distance. There'll be a couple series separating it from us, and at that point it's just a part of the show. There's going to be new people hopping on board who binge watch the whole show in one go. They're probably not going to stop at series 11 episode 1 when there's 5 series left to go. As I mentioned in my previous video, the Chibnall era is short. It's only 31 episodes. People can go through that really quickly. So in the grand scheme of things, it's just a drop in the bucket. People will watch these episodes to get to the new stuff, and they'll probably enjoy it. There'll be new fans who come in with fresh eyes and no biases, and they might even love it. The Chibnall Era is a part of Doctor Who wedged between another part of Doctor Who. There's going to be a bunch after it, and there's a bunch before it. Now that the Chibnall Era is no longer the newest thing, and there's an era following it, and hopefully an era following the era following it, sure, there'll be people who probably say, oh well, I preferred the Moffat era, or I preferred the Schmoobles Schmams era in 2042 or whatever. At the end of the day, the Chibnall Era is just a small, cozy corner of Doctor Who, completely separate from everything else in terms of style and tone. You guys know me, you guys know that I enjoy watching Doctor Who non-chronologically. I love watching it out of order, hopping from one era, from one decade to another. And that's part of the reason why I love the Chibnall Era so much. It's such a great palate cleanser. I would say I watch around 30 episodes of Doctor Who a week. Probably, maybe more. Sometimes it gets hard to keep track. And the vast majority of that, let's just say, is not modern Who. But sometimes it is. And to avoid burnout, I don't like to keep just going back to the same couple of episodes. And instead, I want something different. I want something modern, I want something new, but I want something different. And the Chibnall Era gives that to me. Series 11 especially, due to the nature of the standalone episodic episodes. All of them are really quite enjoyable. But that's just how I view it. Let's go back to talking about Series 13. Series 13 starts off strong with the Halloween apocalypse, which is just a fun episode. The introduction of Swarm, the not so clear introduction of Azure, all of the main players being thrown at the wall, and we get to see what sticks. And something which definitely stands out to me, especially on this most recent rewatch, is just how excellent the soundtrack is. Now I know I already spent a segment of this video talking about the music, but golly, that ending climactic cliffhanger soundtrack where it's going over the montage of all of the people and where they are in the world, and you were there and you were there. I mean, it's so good, man. I think that is actually a reprise of a song that was used at the end of Ascension of the Cybermen, which is in and of itself a really good episode as well. But man, it's just such an effective cliffhanger, especially with the falling out of the TARDIS effect and the Flux in general. I remember when I was first watching, I was like, oh, what is it? What is the Flux? We've been around this rodeo multiple times in Doctor Who. We kind of realized that this is something that is going to be undone, but we can still put ourselves in and enjoy it, which is exactly what I did with War of the Sontarans, which is an episode I probably enjoyed just about as much as the Halloween apocalypse. It is just a barrel of laughs. I mean, I know we could all be snobs and we could all turn our noses up at Dan running off with a wok in his hand to beat up Sontarans and say, well, this isn't like Midnight. But different strokes for different folks. Not every Doctor Who episode has to be the best of the best, most highbrow, hard sci-fi, social commentary. Sometimes all I want is a silly, fun adventure. And that's exactly what I got from Dan walking up to a Sontaran saying, hey, do you know where the pierhead is? And then the Sontaran turns around and then he hits him on the back of the head. I mean, again, it's all coming back to Dan being just really fun. You have Vinder as well. Vinder he got an introduction in the Halloween apocalypse, but it's more at the forefront here with his interactions with Yaz, and it's just so good. The Temple of Atropos is such a well brought out location. Yeah, I will confess that some of the CG on the outer shots look a little weird, but it's still badass, man. I think Yaz here, I think she's just a really enjoyable character throughout this whole series. What would the Doctor do on the hand, all of that stuff, building the relationship between these two characters that was slightly hinted at during the end of series 12, but is this safe to say? I think it was a late inclusion to have them be romantic. Guys, I'm focusing on series 13 right now. We'll talk about Tasmin later, but all of that is really fun. All of the stuff with Mary Seacole I think is amazing. I love the injured Sontaran because it's one of Dan Starkey's just funniest moments as a Sontaran. Of course Strax is funny as well, you know, you guys know I love Strax. I love the snowman. He can be a little bit too much in the Crimson Horror, but overall I do like Strax. And the presentation of the Sontarans is just exquisite. I think a lot of people forget that the Sontarans started out as time travelers. I mean, the first Sontaran story is called The Time Warrior. And Flux, at its core, is a Sontaran story. It's a Sontaran story that they deserved in the modern series after the abysmal, I do not care guys, The Sontaran stratagem in the Poison Sky did them so dirty, it's actually unbelievable. The redesign is dog shit, they act so out of character, and they're just pussies, man. The Sontarans are warmongers, so it is so satisfying, finally, after however many years it's been, to see an army of Sontarans fighting another army. And I don't mean in this pussy way, where they've disabled all of the army's weapons. What's even the point then? The Sontarans choking everyone out with chemical weapons, beside being a really lazy metaphor, is just lame, and it shouldn't be the Sontarans. I think that episode would be a lot better if it wasn't the Sontarans. Of course, it would have to be entirely reworked into something that was actually good, but still, it did them so dirty. And it also did Martha dirty, one of my favorite villains, and at that point, my favorite companion, and you waste both of them. Whose bright idea was it to bring Martha back and then to only have the real her for 15 minutes of part 1 and then replace her with an evil clone? Like, what? Martha was competent enough to travel the whole world by herself in the Master's dictatorship, and you're telling me she gets fooled by these guys? Even Freema Agyeman was like, yeah, that's some bullshit.
When Martha first gets caught, if you like, I did have a feeling that after everything she's been through, how did she not see that one coming when those two guys take her into that room? It's these two soldiers that she's probably never had much of a dialogue with.
But anyway, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, the Sontarans. In classic Doctor Who, the Sontarans are a major threat. They actually don't get that many appearances. It's the Time Warrior, the Sontaran stratagem, the Invasion of Time, and then I think it's just the 2 Doctors after that, unless you count something which I won't mention. The Rutans, of course, got 1 appearance in Horror at Fang Rock, which is, I just love that episode. And then again in the same season, of course, they invade Gallifrey. They literally invade Gallifrey. The Sontarans are strong, man. It makes sense that they can mess around with time this way. And the reveal that Russia has been replaced with Sontar, oh my god, it's just so inspired and funny and entertaining. The "I wanted to ride a horse" line is Flux my beloved. And then we get to that ending, man, and oh my god, what a great cliffhanger. Swarm holding his finger up to snap next to Yaz's head, and then you hear the snap as the title sequence is coming in. Oh my goodness, that is one of the best cliffhangers in modern Doctor Who. And it leads us right into the next episode, Once Upon Time, which is one that I am definitely more fond of than most people. Apparently most people don't like this episode, more than most in the Chibnall Era, because of course there's going to be, you know, that subset of people who are like, well, if it's in the Chibnall Era, then it's bad. But digging deeper even beyond that, there are people who actually like the first 2 episodes of Flux and then say that this one is bad, which is crazy to me, because out of these 3 episodes, I actually think this is the best one so far. It's got the emotion, it's got the horror, it's got the character work, and it's got the lore. Something I love is metaphorical storytelling. Telling a story through stand-ins or through familiar images, audience connotations, stuff like that. And I just love, it's such a genius choice in my opinion, to show the division strike force of the Doctor's team, in quotation marks, using characters that we already know. It is a brilliant way to keep the mystery alive as to what these activities really look like, while also telling us what happened. Now, I will confess, I do wish that it just stayed with the Fugitive Doctor after it was revealed. I just want more screen time from Jo Martin, to be honest. It's kind of part of the reason why I wish she came back in the finale. But it's still an incredible scene, as are the ones with Dan. Now, I feel like Yaz gets the real short end of the stick here, which is crazy, because in Can You Hear Me, there were actually some really interesting flashback sequences with Yaz. They were probably one of the better parts of that episode, which I feel could have been really good, but it was just, again, a little bit too short. If that one was a 2-parter, it would have been great. But here, instead, Yaz sees a look into her future, where she's playing a video game for some reason. I do like the scene of her in the police car. I thought that was pretty damn great, and it was a nice callback to what life was like for her as a probationer in Series 11. But this video game stuff, I mean, I guess you got to get the Weeping Angel in there somewhere, right? And we are also introduced to the Grand Serpent, played by celebrity guest star. Call me crazy, I'm a Grand Serpent fan. I think this guy's pretty damn badass. And then we come to my favorite moment of the episode, because it's unhinged. Swarm's rant is probably the most dense piece of sci-fi writing in modern Doctor Who, and it makes me laugh every time. I remember reading this in the script for the first time, I actually burst out laughing. Now, that probably wasn't the intended effect by Chris Chibnall. but it still makes me like the episode. You guys may know this about me, this is definitely a me thing. I am a big fan of incredibly overcomplicated lore. I did make a video about Longbarrow, and this is a deep cut. Do you see what I mean when I say that not everyone might like this series, but I definitely do? I mean, at some points I wonder if this series was just specifically made for me. Let me read this out. Cough cough. You think we would cower before the division when we have taken control of its dirty secret? Beat. A planet called Time, thinking this could bring the dark times to an end. Beat. Time is not controllable, Doctor. It will not do as other beings bid. It will. It must. Here we are, still engaged in the founding conflict. Beat. There is no greater battle than this. The battle between time and space. And time shall not lose. Time shall never surrender to space. Beat. No planetary mass, however sophisticated, can imprison the force of time. This planet, this construction, is not just a fallacy, not just futile hubris. Beat. It is heresy, and see how many lives it has cost. What the fuck does that even mean?
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Okay, so guys, pop quiz. Do you think he's talking about time the planet, time the place, time the thing, time the concept, or time the being? He's talking about none? Note your answers down in the comments below, I'll grade you on a curve. And then we've got the Village of Angels, which I feel like even people who don't like the Chibnall Era, you gotta admit, it's a pretty good episode. This one introduces Jericho, who is another incredible addition to the series. The subplot involving the Weeping Angels, the temporal extraction, all of it is just really well thought out and so tense to watch. There are just some incredible sequences in this one. I love the use of the cameras, the arms coming out of the walls. I'm actually not the biggest Weeping Angel fan in the world, even though I do like every episode they appear in, but they are incredible in this one. And another amazing cliffhanger, taking us right into episode 5, which is probably the part of the series where it all goes tumbling downhill. And it's because we've got too much to do. Yazdan and Jericho, stuck in the past, have to travel all around the world, I think even twice. Meanwhile, the 13th Doctor is basically static. And while I don't necessarily think it's the most damning of criticisms, I do understand why a few people could be a little let down by the incredibly quick resolution to the cliffhanger. But the real highlight of the episode, at least in my opinion, is the Grand Serpent storyline. This is my favourite part of this episode, and honestly the only thing that's really carrying it for me. The journey through the history of UNIT, which again is so interesting to me. And while yes, there are a few inconsistencies which make the UNIT timeline, which is already completely broken, mind you, but this just adds an even more annoying and finicky detail thrown in there, with the Brigadier's voice cameo inclusion, but it's, by God, it looks good. I wish there was more of this. I wish this had been a part of the story since episode 1. I feel like introducing a new plot point this far into the series was a major mistake, especially when it is so good as this and so interesting. Kate Stewart, of course, shows up at the end, does nothing, gets everyone hyped up, rinse, repeat, and it turns out the Grand Serpent and the Sontarans are working together, which brings us into the Vanquishers, which is one of the finales of all time. It's a complete mess. It's very difficult to understand, especially what's done with the Flux, and my evidence is that even Rusty Davies didn't understand what happened with the Flux. But before we jump ahead to that, let's take it back a few notches. Tecteun reveals that she is the one who created the Flux to destroy the universe so that they could travel to another one and start anew. And she did this with the help of Swarm and Azure, who of course they're Ravagers. It's their technology that is powering the Flux with psychicness. Okay, that I understand. But then secretly on the side, Swarm and Azure are using passengers to build a psychic bridge to get to Tecteun so that they can then kill her. But while that's happening, they also find the footwatch containing the Doctor's lost memories. And so they're like, okay, we're gonna torment you and this house that represents who you are, which kind of ties into Longbarrow. I don't believe it when Christian said he didn't read Longbarrow. There's too many similarities, man. And so far, I feel like we can all follow what's happening. Doctor was here, Tech Taeyun was here with her, Swarm and Azure come together, they're torturing her. That much I get. But then the Doctor splits into 3, so that they can wrap up all 3 plot points at the same time. But she can also kind of communicate with herself? Okay. And then meanwhile, the Sontarans, who have killed all of the Lupari off screen, by the way, are going to use their ships to create a barrier to defeat the Flux, because somehow the Lupari ships are the only thing that can protect against the Flux. And so to do that, they send out a transmission to lure in the Daleks and Cybermen. But then that doesn't work because, wait, what's going on with the Doctor again? But what happens before that is actually Swarm and Azure reset the universe using Tech Taeyun's magic box so that they can, and I'm paraphrasing here, destroy it again and again forever. But what happens is they go back to the Temple of Atropos on the planet Time and then speak to the thing Time, which is different to the concepts of time, I think, who then is like, but the universe ain't destroyed, dumbass, because you reset it. And so he kills both of them. But because they're both Ravagers, they're like, you know, I'm fine with dying anyway. And then Time then becomes Doctor Who and it's like, the Master's coming to get you. Doctor's like, what? What does that mean? Like a fucking dumbass. And then Diane dumps Dan for no reason. What the hell, Diane? But I will say that ending scene where Dan goes to the TARDIS and then the Doctor and Yaz have that little heart-to-heart and then the Doctor drops the fob watch into the TARDIS telling it to keep it secret and keep it safe. All of that for me, thumbs up. Episode's still a mess though. And that's basically why I love Flux. What I'm trying to say is that you need a very particular taste. You need a very particular taste. Your palate needs to be, you need a particular taste. Okay, let's shift gears. I don't know if you guys can believe this, but in my whole segment in my previous video where I talked about why I liked the Chibnall era, I actually never brought up the haunting of Villa Diodati. I think it would have been a really easy goal to score because even if you don't like the era, let's be real here, this one's a certified banger. We all know it to be true, no use pretending. And yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with everyone, this episode is amazing. I remember watching this when it came out and being shocked at how good it was. And even now, 5 years later, I still go back and every time I am shocked at how good it is. It exceeds expectations. So I felt like it would have been too easy to bring it in and say, well, I like the Chibnall era because Haunting of Villa Diodati good. But at the same time, now that I have a little bit more time, I think it would be fun to talk about why I think not only this episode, but its follow-ups are actually pretty damn fun. But first, part 1. Why is Haunting of Villa Diodati so good? I think for me, it's a mixture of atmosphere, character, funny character moments, and exceptional action. It is kind of a trope in Doctor Who, especially classic Doctor Who, to have what I like to call Manor House episodes. You know, stuff like Ghostlight, Evil of the Daleks. Surprisingly, there aren't as many as you think there are, but this haunted house, Manor House style of episodes has always proven to be successful. If you want a guaranteed banger, just set it in a manor house. Trust me, works every time. The setting is inherently interesting. It's claustrophobic, it's beautiful, and it establishes the time period that this is meant to take place in, which of course links to the design of the Cyberman, which we will be talking about. The characters of Lord Byron and Mary Shelley really work well and are wonderfully brought to life. The format of Doctor Who requires a revolving door of secondary characters. Every episode has an additional cast, and it's always to the benefit of an episode when these guys hit it out of the park. My personal favourite is Fletcher. I think he's funny. And of course, the importance of these characters is generated from their status as well-known historical figures. Mary Shelley, of course, is the author of Frankenstein, which, although has been touched on in the past with Doctor Who, is still something that has not been mentioned in the actual show itself. Of course, the Cyberman's actual origins are not inspired by Frankenstein at all. They are more so a reflection of the fears of the 1960s on body implants and conversion. And it just so happened that both of the stories are incredibly and thematically similar. This was also the inspiration of the Big Finish story, The Silver Turk, which is definitely different to the Haunting of Villa Diodati and good in its own way. But I don't think that takes away from anything in this episode. Needless to say, the direction is stunning and the episode is completely gorgeous, but that's just part and parcel for the Chibnall era. I find it ironic that people say the Chibnall Era doesn't use location work. They're just on crack, by the way. If anyone says that, they're smoking something. And this episode is probably the most popular of the era, even though it uses the least location work. It still does use location work, by the way, at the end, but it's mostly shot inside, setting it apart from the vast majority of the era. Again, the only parts of the Whittaker era that aren't largely shot on location are the ones that have COVID restrictions put upon them. Even then, War of the Sontarans was largely shot on location. But anyway, minor criticism aside, the episode is stunning. The design direction, the lighting, the atmosphere, again I bring that up, which ties us into the horror aspect of the episode. The repeating floors, the ghosts, the characters stuck in loops going back and forth and back and forth. It's all very effective and makes sense in retrospect, which takes us to the turning point, the revelation of the episode, where we finally meet the lone Cyberman. And what a scene! The suspense building up, the music, the far-off imagery of the Cyberman flashing in the distance. A traveler through time, they call him. Oh my goodness, he is so fucking badass. And then when he finally enters and he keeps saying, "Are you the Guardian?" God damn! Again, this era is so quotable. There's a quick little reference to Bill and then we move on. The design of Ashad is incredible. And when I said in my previous video that he's probably the most unique thing done with the Cybermen since the 60s, I kind of want to give some more evidence to that claim. Because of course people really love the Series 10 finale with the Cybermen. World Enough in Time and the Dr. Fools, which in my opinion are brilliant episodes. And definitely a step up from the Series 8 finale, let's just say that. In fact, I'll probably say they're an objectively better version of those same stories. Actually, pause everything, let me cook that. I was re-listening to this while editing and I thought, nah, I gotta expand on this because it is so real and no one else sees this apart from me. I think I'm the only person to have fit these two pieces together, that these stories, the Series 8 finale and the Series 10 finale, are literally the exact same story. Hear me out. A two-part finale featuring the Master and the Cybermen. That one's obvious, superficial, surface level similarity. But then you go deeper. Part 1 has the hook of one of the main characters being killed. In Series 8 it's Danny, in Series 10 it's Bill. Except plot twist, they're not really dead, but they've been taken to hell, with Danny being in literal hell and Bill being in the metaphorical hell of the bottom of the ship, the lowest level. It's like Dante's Inferno. In this hell, there's a weird and wacky person who then gets revealed to be the Master at the end as the ending cliffhanger. Danny turns into a Cyberman, Bill turns into a Cyberman, the Cybermen start flying, but there are a few key differences, and while they may seem small, they are the thing that separates a good episode from a bad episode. This was actually something that was originally going to be a whole video of mine, but I'm kind of just cutting it down to throw in there to this big one, which is the handling of Missy as a character. Now this could be a whole extra segment of this video and a whole video of its own, so I'm just gonna slice it down really fast. But basically the main point is that in Series 8 when Missy says to the Doctor, "We're not so different, you and I, Spider-Man," that kind of goes against the whole character of the Master. It should be the Doctor giving that speech, and then the Master either listens or ignores. And that is exactly what happens in the Series 10 finale. It's literally the same speech, roles reversed, and it makes perfect sense. It's in line with the Doctor's character, it's in line with the Master's character, it's in line with Missy's character too. It's a bit of a shame for me. By the time Stephen Moffat realized what his vision of the Master was going to be, it ended. In Series 8, the character is poorly thought out, not well formed, clashing with the entire history of the character. In Series 9, she's just there, I guess. At least she's funny. And then in Series 10, we finally figured out what we were going to do with her. And that all comes to a climax in the Series 10 finale, which is a brilliant episode of Doctor Who, if I dare say myself. Additionally, a big problem the Series 8 finale has is that for most of Part 1, nothing is happening. Straight up nothing is happening. This is a big problem with a lot of the Peter Capaldi era, by the way. The pacing is so goddamn bad. It takes us 30 minutes out of a 45-minute episode to get where we need to be. We're just dragging our heels until we can actually get to the story. But the series 10 finale sidesteps this with the use of flashbacks and the use of time dilation, because there is no reason why the 12th Doctor wouldn't just immediately go down to the basement, which, if there wasn't any time dilation, would mean no episode. But because there is time dilation, we have a legitimate reason as to why the 12th Doctor can't just sort out the problem immediately, which is not there in the series 8 finale. Additionally, the whole Dawn of the Dead thing that they had going on in Death in Heaven just completely falls flat. Now that is an episode I don't like. The Doctor makes Clara put down her own boyfriend? You kidding me? You made the Brigadier a Cyberman. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that this story's good, this story's not. Back to the video. But when it comes to a strictly original story standpoint, this episode is a little familiar, let's just say. Nothing against it, I'm not gonna hate. As I said, I don't call out The Haunting of Villa Diodati for having superficial similarities with the Silver Turk. But at a certain point, the similarities between the series 10 finale and Spare Parts, they become a little less superficial, let's just say that. Episodes still goated though, and so is Spare Parts. You guys know I love that story. But what I'm trying to say is that this idea isn't necessarily unique in quotation marks. It's very, very good, but it isn't unique. Not that everything needs to be unique. I'm just saying that Ashard is literally very different to anything we've ever seen the Cybermen be before, which sets it apart from everything else. The character is also so well realized in this one episode. It kind of leaves us guessing on whether or not he's good or bad or misunderstood morally, right up until the very end when he grabs Mary Shelley's arm. He talks about his children, his dedication to the cyber cause. And it really is a wonderful tale of a believer who was never fully converted being the last one to carry the legacy. The concept of the lone Cyberman is amazing, and in this episode executed perfectly. So let's go on to the next one. Ascension of the Cybermen is an episode which I really enjoy, and I really enjoyed it when I first watched it as well. It's got incredible action, incredible direction, and this horrific feeling of dread, which only certain episodes can create. Every character is pushed to the brink. The situation is dire, and of course that cliffhanger is just amazing. The introduction of the cyber warriors, the navigation through the graveyard in space, and that opening monologue, yeah, this shit's fire. A minor problem that I will call out, because I like being fair, is the Brendan subplot, which is wonderfully directed and does make some sense in retrospect. When you know the full story, I feel like this should have been done a little differently. Now maybe that's because I'm more critical of the Timeless Child storyline, even if the payoff does make sense. Which leads us right into the Timeless Children, which a lot of what I said about Ascension of the Cybermen is valid here too. My only problem with the episode is that Ashad gets killed off. Now of course he does get brought back, which basically fixes my main problem with the episode, but it is still a little disappointing to see the most badass character introduced in years be dispatched with ease by the Master, even if it is with a tissue compression eliminator. I think it would have been more interesting to see them team up. Although having the Master create these cyber masters who then come in and they can regenerate and all of that, it is a wonderful idea. That stuff is just awesome, I don't care. Cyber Time Lords are something that were played around with in the comics, if I remember correctly, and they probably are the most scary version of the Cybermen seen to date, just because of how strong they are. They're like the Nightmare and Silver Cybermen turned up to 11. Some people hate the frowns. I do think they fixed the design in Power of the Doctor, but I think they look pretty damn cool here too. And of course Sasha Dhawan is just carrying the episode on his back entirely. I feel like people calling the episode an exposition dump is another one of those copy-pasted criticisms that you see a lot. If you actually rewatch the episode, there is quite a bit of action. Yes, there is a story that needs to be told, but it is not told in a boring way, at least I think. Maybe that's just because I love Sasha Dhawan. Again, it would have been really interesting if he was the Timeless Child. And I think it would have been more exciting too. It would have been a great inner conflict, let's say. People make fun of that line. I actually think it's quite funny. And it's also fitting considering all three of the major players in the story have an inner conflict. The Master's probably being the least compelling of the three. He cannot bear that a part of himself is the Doctor. I feel like he's lying there, especially if you bring in Power of the Doctor for context. I feel like he's lying there. Again, if the Master was the Timeless Child, all of the problems would be fixed. I honestly think if the Master was the Timeless Child, this would be like an A-tier episode. I was left genuinely gobsmacked climaxed by some of the shots in this one. It is superbly directed by Jamie Magnus Stone. And the three-parter as a whole feels really cohesive, with each episode leading quite cleanly into the next. Something hit me a few months ago while I was thinking about, of all things, A Nightmare in Silver. And it was the fact that I think that episode personally is not very good. It's one of the biggest disappointments to me because I was so hyped for it when it came out and was left feeling like it was a 45-minute episode. Do you see what I mean about the format sucking? There is too much here for a single episode. The concept is a banger. You have an abandoned theme park with Cyberman tombs under it in a society war-torn with legends of Cybermen acting as boogeymen. All of that stuff is fire. The problem is that there's just too much for 45 minutes. The reveal of Porridge at the end feels a little unearned because we just met these characters 2 seconds ago. We don't really know about this world. We don't know about the impacts that it had. And overall, we're just left wanting more. And I was thinking to myself, how would one fix this episode? Initially, I thought, well, maybe you'd have to make it a two-parter. But after a while, I came to the realization that for a story of that scale, it had to be 3 parts. There's just too much there. How would you put it all in one story? And so I was playing around with it. I was thinking, well, maybe it'd be interesting to have one story be in the past, one story be in the present, and one story be in the future. You could show all of the impacts of the cyber wars. You could show the past before it. It would give gravitas to the whole situation. And then it hit me. The fixed version of Nightmare in Silver is The Haunting of Villa Diodati and that whole 3-parter. That is how you tell a Cyberman story. Overall, I think I like it. In that last segment, I mentioned a few quotes. I love quoting stuff. It becomes kind of like an in-joke after a while. And the Chibnall Era for me has so many quotable lines. You know how people like to make fun of prequel memes? The Chibnall Era kind of has a bunch of lines like that. You may think I'm joking, but if you've been in the Discord with me, you know I'm not. I quote a bunch of this stuff like on the daily. I think my favorite one to use is the same brain. But there are so many. Spy, Master, Are you the Guardian?
Are you the Guardian?
30 minutes ago I was a white-haired Scotsman. Ryan Sinclair, don't you dare. Have a couple of those for tonight. Oh, right lads, looking for the pierhead. We have long ago developed the resistance to go. I could go on forever. There are so many funny lines. And again, this kind of ties back into it where I feel like some Americans don't like the show because they don't like certain accents of the characters. Because when people point out certain examples of lines that they call bad writing in quotation mark, trademark. Bad writing is such a blanket statement, by the way. It's kind of lost all meaning to me. But anyway, when people point out examples of that, I imagine in my head David Tennant saying that exact line and people having no problem with it whatsoever. Again, what I mentioned before last time was the "that's what I call an inner conflict" line, which people say is telling, not showing, even though it's a joke, because it's ironic, because it has multiple meanings. And so that's why Ashad responds with, yes. And then the doctor's like, oh, I didn't think you'd just accept it like that. Because she was trolling. Except people have a problem with it because it's Jodie Whittaker who said it. If David Tennant said that exact line, people would love it. Because it's a funny line. No hate. Because a lot of these lines are funny lines. Again, this kind of links back to the criticism of bad writing. I mean, look at this, right? Everyone calls the Chibnall Era poorly written TM, and the Russell T Davies era really well written. But what is the first line, post-Chibnall, of the new Russell T Davies era? Once upon a time, Lord.
Once upon a time, Lord.
Okay, but this is good writing. I feel like I've really overcomplicated my main point, which is that when people say something has bad writing, I kind of tune out. I wish people would just say what they meant, or at least try and be a bit more specific. When someone says the Chibnall Era has bad writing, I've got no idea what they're talking about. Are they talking about the dialogue? I think some of the dialogue's really funny. Are they talking about the overall plot arcs? Are they talking about the character arcs? Are they talking about the concepts of individual episodes? It gets even more confusing to me when people said the writing went downhill ever since Matt Smith left. Like, what's that supposed to mean? Are you saying Moffat got worse and then Chris Chibnall came in and then maybe it went up a little bit and then it got worse than it was even before that? Like, what are you even talking about? At that point, it's so nebulous. I just have no idea what anyone's waffling about at all. Basically, if you're in the comment section and you're writing a reason why you don't like the Chibnall Era, challenge. Do not use the words bad writing. Explain why you don't like the Chibnall Era without using those 2 words. Talking of bad writing, let's talk about the Battle of Ranskurav Kolos. This episode is, from one episode I really like to one episode which I don't think is very good. You can't say that I haven't been fair in this video. I've touched on the extremes of both sides. The Battle of Ranskurav Kolos is an episode that makes me a little upset because I really do think it has potential. And as you guys know, I actually think Series 11 is a pretty good series and on the whole, pretty consistent. Yeah, I'm not really a fan of arachnids in the UK. I feel like the Sungara conundrum could do with a little bit more work, but outside of that, I think each episode is a pretty consistent level of quality. But this episode, it just lets the whole thing down. And I know, Chris Chibnall said that there wasn't enough time for him to write it, but at the same time, you're the one in charge, pal. You gotta make time. If this episode was amazing, Series 11, I think would be loved. I genuinely attribute most of the negativity for this series, or maybe even the whole era, to this one episode. And as you can imagine, that makes me upset. People have asked me before, what are the things in Doctor Who that make you angry? Because as you guys know, I very rarely get angry when talking about Doctor Who or when watching Doctor Who, outside of when I play it up for enjoyment purposes. Because on the whole, when it comes to Doctor Who, I'm very positive. I like to see the bright side of things. I like to see the light in the darkness, let's say. But the thing in Doctor Who that can really grind my gears is when Doctor Who lets us down. And by that, I don't mean when Doctor Who doesn't listen to the fans or when Doctor Who takes a creative risk that doesn't pan out or blah blah blah. What I'm referring to is when Doctor Who lets the haters win. When Doctor Who takes an L, we as fans also take that L. And I must confess, I get a little salty over it. A recent example of this would be the Davros debacle, where I've been working overtime defending Rusty Davies, and then the dude comes out.
Time and society and culture and taste has moved on, and there's a problem with the Davros of old in that he's a wheelchair user who is evil.
To say some disingenuous shit which I don't even think even he believes, right, being frank. It's such a dumbass thing to say, and he's clearly gone against it so many times in the past, and even now bro has an action figure of Davros just chilling in his room. The guy clearly doesn't give a shit, and he clearly doesn't think Davros is in some wheelchair or perpetuating harmful stereotypes. That is clearly something someone else has pushed upon him. The guy has said too much stuff to the contrary for it to actually be his true beliefs.
He's back. He's actually essentially still the same Davros. You know, you bring back the Cybermen, they're from a parallel world, so we can do our own thing with them. When you bring back the Master, he is regenerated, and so every Master is as different as every Doctor is different. It's quite important to remember, I think, this is literally Davros, literally the same man. So I wasn't out to reinvent it in that sense. And also, why reinvent one of the best villains ever? I don't know what more you add to Davros. I added the one thing I did add was the body. We're not reinventing a classic, we're refurbishing a classic, I think, and reintroducing it to a brand new generation. It's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I mean, he is literally on camera saying that you'd have to be a fool to change the design.
Honestly, you try and design something that is still being made and popular and used and powerful and successful 45 years later.
But why did this make me angry? Is it the law decision? Well, not really. It's the fact that a bunch of people who are preying on Doctor Who's downfall got in a reasonable punch. And it's the same thing here. There are detractors of Series 11 who say a bunch of stuff which I just think is unfair, to be honest. But when they say that the finale lets it down, that is not unfair. In my opinion, that is a fair criticism. It's not unreasonable, it's not unfounded. There's a lot of stuff with this episode which you can call out for being really inconsistent, and that makes me mad because I want this series to succeed, and if this episode did succeed, then we would all be winning. There are certain episodes which I feel are more important than others, like Orphan 55 for example. I personally think this episode isn't really that good, but at the end of the day, if this episode isn't that good, does it matter? Not really. In the Forest of the Night is another one. Does that episode really matter? Like, good or bad? Nah. Battle of Ranskurav Kolos needed to be good, and there's stuff in there that could be good. I like the idea of Tim Shaw coming back as the final boss. I like that idea. I think it's a cool idea, okay? I think it's a great way to wrap up the end of Graham and Ryan's character arc. I think it's a good way to challenge our heroes. The problem is that it just doesn't make sense. The whole story doesn't make sense. There's a bunch of stuff that's brought up that never gets any payoff. There's a random doomsday clock thrown in there for good measure. The supporting cast are completely irrelevant, and it's just too messy, man. The episode is so messy. Overall, as an episode, I don't actually think it's the worst thing ever. As I said, I think there are some good parts in there, but because it's such an important episode that needed to be done well and wasn't, I think that's why it's one of the ones that I dislike so much. Because for all its faults, the Series 12 finale is a good episode. It's well made and it makes sense, and it's the creator's original vision. The Battle of Ranskor Avkolos came out the oven unfinished. We didn't let him cook. And when you compare that to the rest of Series 11, which is actually quite well formed, it looks even sadder by comparison. Which I suppose leads us back to Series 11, which... do I need to talk more about this? I felt like I already touched on this a lot. If you guys want to hear me talk about why I enjoy Series 11 in a little bit more detail, you can check out my previous video, because there I go even in detail into certain scenes where I talk about the cinematography and the writing and why I really enjoy both, and the overall dynamics of the series. But something which I didn't mention, and I want to touch on just a little bit more now, is the complaint that it feels like an ITV drama, which is something that I've seen be thrown around for a couple years now, and in my opinion, no. I don't really know what else to say except that. Again, this links back to my previous video in that where I was talking about the same copy-pasted criticisms, the hive mind, where people just regurgitate stuff they've heard other people say before, and this is exactly one of those, because it just has no basis in reality, and yet people keep saying it again and again to this day. And I have only one question to people who say this, which is, what ITV shows are you watching? Like, be for real. 90% of the people who say this shit, they don't watch ITV. I say 90%, 90% is generous. It's more like 99%. It's just one of those things that keeps getting said. I think Stephen Moffat had a clip talking about this, where people keep saying that his series is like a fairy tale. And that is true to an extent, but at a certain point, no, it's not really. I'll just play what he said, because he hit it on the head.
As well as a bold change in look, there was also a distinct shift in tone for Series 5. From Russell's kitchen sink drama with companions' families to more, in my opinion, a more fairy tale escapist vibe. Was this a conscious effort to tap into an emerging young adult audience?
No. And I sometimes do think that Russell and I, in order to make us look different, have to be caricatured in our approaches. I think most people who are not Doctor Who fans, if you describe the first 4 years of modern Doctor Who as a kitchen sink drama, would be wondering what the hell was in your kitchen. I mean, and some people say, no, it's a soap opera. It really isn't.
No.
So that's a grotesque exaggeration, and the fairy tale approach is a grotesque exaggeration of mine, really. It's about a wizard in a magic box with a magic wand. I don't think it fits sometimes. It doesn't fit all the time. There's loads of episodes that are not fairy tale at all. It became the thing people said, and once you watch something through a filter of how it's already been described to you, you see it. Go look at any of Russell's series and say fairy tale, and you'll find it there again. Any series of Doctor Who is like a fairy tale, because that is the genre it most precisely resembles. I never went in saying, no guys, I just need a bit more of a fairy tale filter on that lens.
That's basically the same thing here when people call Chris Chibnall's Doctor Who an ITV drama. It's really not like an ITV drama. If you've ever watched even Broadchurch, they're nothing alike. And yes, the only reason people are saying this is because Chris Chibnall made Broadchurch, and that aired on ITV, which means that everything Chris Chibnall did must be like an ITV show. But it does bring something up, which is the state of British television in general. A lot of people get mad at me when I say that Doctor Who is better than 90% of the stuff that's on TV, but it just is. For me personally, it's better than everything that's on TV, but I understand some people, they enjoy their certain shows. But have you ever gone to the trouble of actually checking to see the stuff that's on TV? Most of it is garbage, like true garbage, not Doctor Who garbage, real garbage. It makes Doctor Who's garbage look like God's work. And so yes, even the Chibnall Era 2 is better than most of what's on British TV. That's just a fact. And if you disagree with me, how's this one? Name a British TV show between 2018 and 2022 that was better than Doctor Who. Name one. Sherlock ended before then, that one doesn't count. If you're American, I imagine you can't even think of any British TV show that came out after 2018. That's because even at its worst, in quotation marks, Doctor Who is far above the rest of the competition, okay? This links back to the ratings discussion. People talking about, oh, record low ratings and it's still #1 of the day. TV just dead, bruh. And also the series isn't really like an ITV drama.
We like to troll. We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
I suppose now it's finally time to talk about this. The political commentary in Doctor Who. Now, according to most fans, the Chibnall Era is when it went overboard with it. And personally, to me, I don't think it's that big a part of it. Unless you count the act of the Doctor being female as a political one, which, I mean, maybe. I suppose that's up to interpretation. Me personally, I don't see it as that. But outside of that, there isn't that much beat you over the head political commentary, at least in my opinion. Yes, you have episodes like Orphan 55, and I suppose you can count Rosa as well, if you think racism being bad is a really hot button topic. But outside of that, I don't really think these episodes are that political, or at least that over the top political, like the Ghost Monument. You're gonna tell me that that one's just beating you over the head with allegory? I don't think so. And it gets even crazier to me when people accuse the Chibnall Era of being overtly left-wing. It's funny because if you've been in the fandom, you know there's a whole subset of it that actually calls the Chris Chibnall Era out for not being left-wing enough. Even if you go on the Wikipedia page, you see this clash. People say this because of an episode that Chris Chibnall didn't write, Kablam, where the Doctor says the system isn't the problem. Now this gets a bunch of people incredibly angry. I personally don't really see a problem with it. It's clearly just the writer's opinion. It's up to us as the audience whether we agree or disagree. I don't think it's the most outrageous opinion to have, being real. Like, I can see the clear arguments for or against it. In the context of the episode, it should probably be made clear that there is a bit of a problem in the system. I mean, the whole episode up to this point has been pretty anti-Amazon. But I guess the writer wanted to show some nuance, and in that one particular line it didn't really come out across. I must confess I'm not that offended at that line. A bunch of people, it really makes them angry. I get why, because in this political climate it's quite charged, but to me I see it for what it is, which is a situation that has nuance. And that story has nuance. Kablam isn't a bad episode. I think it has some really good parts to it. But again, people want to have their cake and eat it too by calling the Chibnall Era out for being too woke in quotation marks, but also too right-wing, which it's not too right-wing, let's be real here. People say that the 13th Doctor is a racist because she disabled the Master's perception filter, when if she didn't disable the Master's perception filter, then the guards would have listened to him because he has a perception filter to hypnotize them. No, but that doesn't matter because the Master was sent to a concentration camp, according to my brain. There's no evidence of that in the actual episode. Chris Chibnall has said that that didn't happen, but I mean, who cares, right? I made it up. It's the equivalent of having a headcanon and then getting mad at that headcanon. People are so desperate to find stuff to own the Chibnall Era with politically that they say the Flux is racist. I don't know why, and I don't really care to know why either. Stop saying this stuff, man. Are you guys beginning to see what I mean when I say that some of the criticisms against this era are just made up bullshit? But what angers me isn't necessarily that people are calling out an era for being overtly political or politically inconsistent. You see that with the latest era as well. An episode like The Star Beast, which I personally, especially in retrospect, have come to respect for its political commentary. Unpopular opinion, guys, I actually don't think it did it too badly, outside of maybe one or two lines here and there. But what gets me going is when people just do not apply these same criticisms consistently, especially when it comes to Series 10. But people like to pretend that this series isn't the most overtly and probably obnoxiously political.
2 portions. 1 portion. Is there going to be food sexism even in the future? Is this bloke utopia?
Is the future going to be all girl?
I can only hope. The end point of capitalism.
Cringe! I don't know why, I guess for brownie points, because Chibnall bad. If some of the lines that were in this era were put in the Chibnall Era, people would be pissed off. And I'm not saying that because Bill likes girls. I'm saying that because of lines like this.
The only time I've been a man that last body. Dear Lord, how do you cope with all that ego?
By the way, to add a little bit more to my Star Beast point, I personally think the line, something a male presenting Time Lord would not understand, I think that's a bad line. And after thinking about it, I still think it's a bad line. But the rest of the episode and the handling of the character of Rose, I don't really care for the noble family. Like, I'm not really invested in that, but I still think overall in the episode The Star Beast, I think that was handled well, and I think the issues tackling all of that subject matter were handled well. And overall, I'll give Rusty Davies a thumbs up. You guys know I like The Star Beast in general. It's got its problems, but I still liked it. See, this is me being consistent. I'm not gonna say an episode's shit because it has one line I don't like. But what I'm trying to say is that if you're gonna get mad at Doctor Who for being overtly political, at least be consistent with it. Don't act like it started with the Chibnall era. If anything, I actually think Moffat was more obnoxious with it because some of these lines, man, they grind my gears. Way more than anything in the Chibnall era. People were so starved for stuff to get angry about. They got angry at the Doctor saying, "I've had an upgrade." As if that isn't something entirely in the character of the Doctor to say. The Doctor always thinks that their current incarnation is better than their previous ones. That's why they don't like each other. But anyway, that's my brief spiel on politics. Blech. Remind me to never talk about that again. This is a politically neutral space. If you're listening to this, please don't bring up politics in the comment section, man. I want this to be at least somewhat civil. I feel like I should probably mention this, but let me quickly talk about Eve of the Daleks, because in my opinion, this episode summarizes a lot of the Chibnall era for me. Is this the best episode of all time? No. Does it have a few problems? Yeah. Does it suffer from a lot of issues behind the scenes? Most definitely. But is it fun? In my opinion, yes. I feel like this is a nice, harmless, inoffensive hour of television, which in my opinion left me very satisfied. I've always enjoyed this one, and every time I go back to watch it, I enjoy it again. A lot of people dislike this episode because the Dalek shoots down a door too slow. Okay. I feel like people need to realize what doing the Daleks well and doing the Daleks badly means, because this episode has the Daleks killing the Doctor the most out of any episode of Doctor Who ever, and for me that is a W. Them taking an extra second to shoot a door down, like, I just don't care. And then there's that scene where Dan's running around. It's a funny scene. I like Death to the Daleks, okay? That is an episode which I unironically think is a masterpiece. Do you think I can't handle Dan running around the Dalek for 10-15 seconds in a comedic way? These are the same people who clap and cheer when the Doctor gives that Khalid scientist a plunger in Destination Skaro. Also, if you don't know, Eve of the Daleks was written in, I think it was 2 weeks, maybe it was even 1 week. Either way, things were pretty precarious behind the scenes. And I actually think with all of that added context, it's pretty damn solid, especially considering it's a COVID episode, and especially if you compare it to the one that comes afterwards. You see, a lot of people, they say to me, we don't care about good direction, and then an episode without good direction comes along, and then they realize how much they miss good direction. Okay, just before we get into that one, let me finish talking about Eve of the Daleks, because there was something fully confirmed here that had been playing on people's minds for a couple months now, couple years probably, actually, more realistically, and that is Phasmin. Yes, we're finally talking about it, guys. Yahoo! If you guys know me, you know I love shipping, especially Doctor Who shipping. That's sarcasm, I fucking hate it. To me, shipping 99.9% of the time is a tumor, especially the ones who try to go into my classic Who. Get your grubby hands off it. Leave me alone. I do not accept any of your ships, and I don't want to talk about it, and I don't want to hear you talking about it. Get off my lawn. But with New Who, of course, it's more ingrained in the culture to want to ship Doctor Who with all of his companions, whether that be Rose Tyler or Amy Pond or River Song or Yasmin Khan. Overall, I just don't like it. There's not much that really needs to be said. I do have a little bit of nuance to my take though. I feel like a Doctor Who and Doctor Who companion romance could work, and I feel like it's proven that it could work because of how many people find themselves invested in these storylines. The problem is that it hasn't been yet. I feel every single time they have sacrificed something really important to get to this romance, and I myself personally have never been invested. Keep in mind, this is like the #1 Doctor Who fan. Surely I should be invested in the romances between the characters. And it's not like I hate romance. Yeah, I hate shipping, but that's different from romance. I think romance can be done very well and add a whole new layer to everything. pretty much. And I think a lot of the romantic relationships between non-Doctor Who characters, aka Amy and Rory, have been handled relatively well until they weren't. And so with all of that context, I don't really mind Tasman that much, comparatively. So I still don't like it, but it's not like I don't like it especially. I don't like it equally. There's nothing in it that makes me go, oh my goodness, they did it so poorly. Nah, it's just your classic Doctor Who companion romance, to be honest. And yes, they did listen to the shippers. The one thing I say never to do. And yes, it personally fell a little bit flat to me. Still a good episode though. Unlike Legend of the Sea Devils. Now this episode is not a good episode. And if you guys stuck around this far into the video, you're gonna hear me be negative about the Chibnall Era. Just like you guys, because goddamn. Remember when I said I get annoyed when Doctor Who lets itself down? This is Doctor Who letting itself down. And not slightly, this episode is an embarrassment. I rarely say this guys, but it would have been better if this one wasn't made. See, there are pros and cons to why certain episodes should be made, and I'm always a firm believer of saying, you know, more Doctor Who, better Doctor Who. In this case, no. This episode isn't finished. Straight up, that's just the bottom line. It's an unfinished episode. It shouldn't have been sent out to air. All it does is bring down the reputation of not just the era, but the show in general. There are certain standards of quality that this episode just does not meet. And you can see that in the length of the episode as well. That's because it's not finished. Keep in mind, I was incredibly hyped for this episode because I love the Sea Devils, and I've been wanting to see the Sea Devils ever since 2010. Chris Chibnall has done the Silurians historically pretty damn well, even in episodes where it's just a cameo. And yet here, no, I'm gonna put my foot down. It is not done well. But the reason I brought up Tasman earlier in relation to this episode, because they're the only parts of the story that feel actually finished. That one scene at the end is the only real scene in the episode. Sheesh, this episode sucks. Do you see now? Do you see why I'm so generous to Eve of the Daleks? This was the alternative, okay? They are light years apart. And don't even get me started on the power of the Doctor. But from a boring topic to a fun topic, let's talk about my favorite thing about this era, Power of the Doctor. My favorite episode of the era, and one of my favorite episodes of New Who, to be honest. I love this story. And people look at me, they ask me, they say, why? There's so many problems with the plot. There's a plot hole here, there's a plot hole there. How the hell can you like this? And it's the same reason for why I like the 5 Doctors, which is that all of those plot holes just go way over my head because I'm having too much fun to care. This episode, I mean, something about it is just, there's so much joy in the episode. It gets everything right for me. It has everything I want in an episode. The big 3, companions from the past, great action, great moments, and I mean, it has 5, 6, 7, and 8 in it, bro. That alone sets it above most of the modern show. And people say it's just cameos. What were you guys expecting? These actors are like 70 years old. And don't you dare tell me Tales of the TARDIS did it better. That show is dog shit. And forces in random melodrama where no one asked for it. Thank you very much. Power of the Doctor did it right. And to tie that in even more, the Guardians of the Edge is my favorite scene in the modern series. It is just perfect. It's everything I want from Doctor Who. I think from concept to execution, every single line and every single glance from each actor is perfection. I could never have thought of a scene like this in my mind. I was blown away when I first watched it. In fact, the experience I had when watching Power of the Doctor for the first time is probably my favorite ever, watching a Doctor Who episode as it aired. And yes, you can say, oh, it's mindless fan service, who cares? I care. The Guardians of the Edge is the perfect concept. It's such a wonderful idea that each past Doctor, after they fade away, watches the show with us. Not only is it amazing from a meta context, to imagine the previous Doctors giving their blessing to the current. And yes, that idea gets completely ruined in the 60th anniversary specials, and it kind of shows the opposing sides of the dynamics. We could either have the Guardians of the Edge or by generation. Those are the 2 options. But before I go all negative, let me just gush over this a little bit more. I love that the 8th Doctor's not in robes. That tiny little detail is all I needed. The music as well in the background, I just can't watch this scene without a smile on my face. Even David Bradley, who I was not really that convinced by in Twice Upon a Time, has now been accepted into my beloved group. thanks to this small appearance. He knocks it out of the park. It almost feels like the real First Doctor is there, meeting up with his future self. And then you have Sacha Dhawan taking the Doctor's body with that horrific amalgamation of a suit and just screaming in Yaz's face that, ooh, it's so disgusting, but it's so good too. Yaz also, I feel, got some really good moments in this episode, as does Dan. He kind of fades into the background, but I feel like that was actually for the best, because this story is so personal between these two characters. And it also allows for Ace and Tegan to have a worthy amount of time on the screen, and I don't care what anyone says, these guys were so damn great. Had Ace beating up a Dalek again, come on man. And the moments where they get to talk with their doctors, it just felt like a continuation from the original show. That's kind of something I felt with this era as a whole. In a weird, strange way, Series 11 feels like Season 27. And a lot of you guys are not going to know what I mean by that. But basically, the Chibnall Era has a real similar feel to 80s Doctor Who. And that's because Chris Chibnall was very clearly inspired by 80s Doctor Who. Frontios, Enlightenment, those episodes are very clearly the type of vibe that the Chibnall Era is trying to replicate. And it's kind of weird because a lot of people say they don't really like the 5th Doctor. I personally love the 5th Doctor. You guys know how I feel about the 6th and 7th as well. And so it's great to see that all come to a climax here. Of course, similarities have been drawn to the Timeless Child and the Cartmel Plan. We've talked about that in depth a million times in the past. But it's not even just that superficial similarity. The feel of the episodes are similar as well. And I do think Series 11 was trying to replicate not only Season 1 of the show, but also Season 19, which in turn Season 19 was trying to replicate Season 1 of the show. So it's ever-changing cycle. If you don't know what I mean by that, I'm of course referring to the semi-historical stories, the callbacks to the past. It's funny because Season 19 actually had mostly original villains until the ending as well, and of course Series 11 had all original villains until Resolution. And Resolution and Earthshock are rather similar. Earthshock and Essential of the Cybermen are also rather similar. And then of course Season 20 goes full lore mode with a returning villain every episode, and then Series 12 also goes full lore mode. And then of course Flux kind of mimics Season 23. So yeah, there are a lot of similarities there, and it does feel like a kind of continuation of the original series, far more than Series 1 does. The Rusty Davies era is just completely different from everything else that Doctor Who was before, which is good because it needed to be unique to stand out in the 2005 climate. But anyway, back to Power of the Doctor. Again, Sacha Dhawan carries those scenes where he's taken into custody in unit, the Rasputin scene, that's just cinema. I will say, to give a little bit of criticism, that Rasputin scene is basically a carbon copy of the Sound of Drum scene. Right down to the Master saying, I've got his hand, and then the Sacha Dhawan Master saying, I do! Which basically what happened is Chris Chibnall looked at Rusty Davies and said, let me borrow your homework. That's what happened with that scene. But I don't care because that dance was awesome. The Cyber Masters of course come back. Ruth comes back, although it is just a hologram. And then that final regeneration scene. Yaz and the 13th Doctor share an ice cream looking over Earth, and it's just so good. Where another series might try for the 13th Doctor to go on a goodbye tour, saying goodbye to everyone while crying to herself in a melodramatic way, the 13th Doctor instead celebrates her loss. Of course, torn apart inside by the fact that she is leaving so soon as well, but also accepting and excited for what comes next, just as audiences were. This regeneration sequence on Durdle Door is amazing, surpassed only, in my opinion, by Christopher Eccleston's goodbye in The Parting of the Ways. We're talking about Modern Who, of course, here. Tag your writ is a wonderful line that summarizes the whole of Jodie's Doctor, and is such a breath of fresh air from the needlessly depressing and drawn out regenerations of previous incarnations. And I think overall, in the current context of the show, I preferred a happier, more hopeful regeneration. And then of course she turns into David Tennant, which we all know how that turns out. But then again, taking a step back a little bit, we go to see the companions. Yaz steps out of the TARDIS and meets Graham and Dan, which I just love this duo. Transitioning us to the companion support group. My only complaint being that Kate Stewart is here too. Get out of here, you fraud. Bro thinks she's on the team. That aside, however, this scene is perfect. And not just because it has Ian there. Although Ian being there, guys, that's the original main character of Doctor Who. We put respect on Ian's name, okay? Ian is that guy. Probably the most heroic character in Doctor Who, outside of the Doctor. But where did the Doctor get it from? Where did he learn his humanity? Well, it was from those original characters. Ian Ian and Barbara, one of the best duos in the entirety of Doctor Who's history. With Ian being the leading man, he carried the show to where it is today, and it is his legacy that is being celebrated in this episode. William Russell is a champion, and his appearance in this episode, I think, is the world record gap between a character's appearances in a single TV show ever, with his last appearance being in the season 2 episode The Chase, airing in 1965. I mean, that's just so emotional. I get why these people are crying, man. I would cry too if I had any feelings left. But you got Mel there as well, you've got Joe. I wonder who the person on the computer was. Either way, it is an amazing scene to cap off an amazing era, at least in my opinion, guys. You know how to put that one in there. The way I see it is that at worst, the Chibnall Era is a slightly mediocre era of the show. I personally like it, other people personally don't. Either way, it is not as unfathomably awful as some people want to paint it out to be. And a lot of people who act like it is are doing so because someone told them, rather than because of something they actually thought themselves. And to say that it ruined the show would just be a little strange to me. But a question I do have is, what are people's thoughts on Jodie Whittaker? I've never been able to get a grasp on what people actually think about her, because the conversation around the era is already so poisoned, and people are basically blindly copying what other people say without thinking or watching the episodes for themselves. And when I say that, by the way, let me make this clear. I'm sure that a lot of people who say these comments have watched the episode at some point. At least I would assume over 50% of them have. But I would imagine they've only watched them once and have either gone in wanting to dislike them or watched them when they aired, which is a couple years ago now, people. Series 11, for example. I imagine a lot of people who don't like that series have watched the episodes, or at least most of them. But I imagine that they didn't watch them recently. I imagine they watched them when they came out in 2018, which was 6 years ago. And as you can imagine, if you're half remembering something from 6 years ago and everyone's constantly telling you that it's bad, your brain is going to kind of just put together that it's bad. And for a lot of people who are watching the series nowadays or rewatching episodes, when they go in with the confirmation bias of wanting something to be bad, that can basically solidify them in their stance. Whereas if you actually went into an episode wanting to give it the benefit of the doubt, or hell, even wanting to enjoy it, I imagine most people will be a lot more forgiving. But anyway, back to Jodie Whittaker. Do people like her Doctor? I do, but from what I'm seeing, there are two clashing copy-pasted points, which is that A, on one side, Jodie Whittaker was amazing, but the scripts really let her down. And B, the scripts weren't really that bad, it's just that Doctor Who is miscast, and Jodie Whittaker was the one who was really bad. And then of course there's that secret group, which is that Doctor Who should never have a woman. But anyway, the main thing I'm really trying to figure out is, do people not like the writing, or do people not like Jodie Whittaker's performance? And I think I would probably lean towards people not liking Jodie Whittaker's performance as being a more reasonable explanation, because I do think the writing is about comparable to a lot of the writing of previous series. I mean, there's episodes like Tooth and Claw and New Earth and like the Shakespeare Code and stuff like that. Those episodes wouldn't be out of place in the Chibnall Era, and certain episodes of the Chibnall Era would not be out of place in the Rusty Davies Era. Are we really going to say that these episodes are miles above anything in the Chibnall Era? I don't think so. So I think it has to be Jodie Whittaker, right? Especially when the examples that people call out for bad writing would usually be amended if it wasn't Jodie Whittaker saying them. Like, if you actually go and read the scripts for yourself, you'll find it hard to find bad writing in quotation marks. Again, it's really difficult for me to pin down what that actually means, because of course it's different for different people. I think a lot of people who say that they love Jodie Whittaker but they wish she'd gotten better scripts are kidding themselves. I think they're lying. Now, I have no proof to say this, because of course I don't know what's going on in their heads, but I just think it, okay? But then ultimately the discussion boils down to, should we have a female Doctor? Now, I understand that there are some political implications in this. I kind of briefly went over that earlier, but in my opinion, and in the conversation that I want to have right now, I want to take that completely out of it. And I do think it's not a political act to cast a woman as Doctor Who, especially the way Chris Chibnall did it. I actually think they did it quite cleverly. If you look behind the scenes and stuff like that, I think he did it quite well. And so if we take politics out of it, let's look at the pros and cons of each argument. Should a woman be Doctor Who? So point A, great pros. There is nothing in the show saying that the Doctor can't be a woman. Having a woman in the show might spice things up, it might allow for a different perspective. It also opens the pool of actors up to 50% of the population, meaning you could probably find a better actor or a better fit for the work that you're working on. It could also allow for new avenues of storytelling. It could also just be a lot of fun. All of these arguments, in my opinion, are really solid. But let's look at some of the cons. Well, the con would be that the character of the Doctor has always been envisioned as a stereotypical male hero, and people who say otherwise are on crack. It's a clear dynamic of the character, and you would have to put a lot of thought into it to change that integral part. The third and fourth Doctor being a swashbuckling hero are not accidental parts of the character, and for a long time the appeal of the show was the heroic nature of the Doctor guiding us through these stories. Of course, there's a lot more to it than that. I'm just going over the surface level brief pros and cons. Speaking of which, an argument raised by Peter Davison, which he did walk it back, but I actually think it's not a bad argument, is that it can take away role models from young boys, which is that the character of the Doctor is a pacifist to a certain extent, who doesn't resort to violence to sort out their problems, and having that be an idol for young boys can be very useful. I personally don't think that's really much of a problem. I'm personally not really of the mind that you have to be of the same demographic as a character to associate with that character or relate to that character, but I do understand where this is coming from, and I don't think it's the craziest, most outrageous thing to say. I think personally the weakest point pro the female Doctor is the idea that it's good representation. People don't identify with a character due to immutable characteristics, and if they say they do, they're probably lying. I'm actually going to insert something in here because there is something about this topic that I didn't mention initially in my first recording, and I thought about it in editing and I was like, you know what, that's a really good point, I'm going to put it in. Which is that Doctor Who, for the vast majority of the time that it's been on the air, including right now, has had a 50-50 split of male and female main characters. To act like there weren't women in Doctor Who before the female Doctor is just crazy. At certain points there are even more women than men in the show, and also I don't really think it matters. Again, as I mentioned here, when there was the first all-female TARDIS with the 13th Doctor and Yaz, I wasn't like, well, I'm not gonna watch anymore. And it's the same way in the End of Time when there's the first male-only TARDIS team of modern Who, of course, with the 10th Doctor and Wilf. There is no way that the female audiences were like, hey, there's not a woman on screen, I'm tuning out. If anything, the audience reception to the modern era of Doctor Who should prove that women don't need a female main character to identify with the show. Who do you think were a large number of the audiences watching the David Tennant and Matt Smith era of the show? Again, I know this is kind of a charged topic, but we're delving deep into everything, man. We're talking about everything. Why wouldn't I in a video of this length? But anyway, I hope you understand my point there, which is that saying that the 13th Doctor is good because it's representation is kind of a meaningless thing to say, because that's just not how the mind works. People come together with like-minded people who share similar values. If people only connected with people of the same demographic as them, then the human race would be doomed. Now, I don't think there's no correlation between them, but I do also think that a character's skin color or gender or sex is not something that people consciously have in mind when deciding whether they like or dislike a character. Like, I relate to the 13th Doctor just fine. I've said this before, I've connected with characters like Perry. Now, I don't know if you guys know this about me, but I don't share many similarities with Perry. But it's the mindset, it's the values, it's the shared characteristics that allows you to connect with a character who doesn't match your certain demographics. Like Goku, for example. We don't look alike. I do look like Broly though. But wait, what are we talking about? Oh yeah, Jodie Whittaker. Overall for me, I feel like the concerns of why having a female Doctor might be negative are not the most terrible thing ever. In fact, I don't think there's anything really wrong with them. For me personally, I am definitely way in favor of the decision because I like Jodie Whittaker, and also I feel like it could lead to really greater things in the future. Limiting people who can be cast by the Doctor to one demographic basically means you're cutting yourself off from all of the other wonderful people who could play the part. That's just how I see it though. The real question is, do people actually like Jodie Whittaker? I wish I had an answer. I don't know. I do. But then again, I see the show in a different way to other people. What's up everybody? Welcome back to another part of the video. The secret part of the video. I'm adding this one later because while I was editing this one, I realized I'm not done. I'm not done talking about this era. I've got so much more to say and I will never have an opportunity as good as this to say it. May as well double down. If you've made it this far in and haven't realized, this is a video about the Chibnall Era. And as you can imagine, there is so much stuff in this era that it makes it difficult to all touch upon in a single video. There was always gonna be stuff which I would look back on and be like, damn, why didn't I talk about that? And so I thought, you know what, why didn't I just go over them? I've tried to structure this video around certain topics. There's been those title cards, but this part of the video, there's kind of no structure. I'm going off script. And a lot of this stuff is just smaller things that I didn't really know where to fit in. But also, how are you guys feeling? You guys enjoying the video? I imagine anyone who's still watching is probably using this as background noise while they play video games. But still, I hope I can entertain. Don't worry, there's still a lot more. But also, from here on out, nothing held back. It's funny because the Chibnall Era is by far the shortest era of the modern series, and yet there's still just too much to talk about. So where better to start than with the Next Time trailers. Now I know you guys are all looking at me funny, and I know you guys are all thinking, who the hell cares? But I do, okay? There's something so special about seeing the next episode upcoming. Just a little sneak preview. You've got that wonderful editing. It's got the Doctor Who theme in the background. I love it. In fact, I should probably do a Doctor Who Next Time trailer tier list because some of them, they're still stuck in my head to this day. So far in the video, I've been talking about why I like the Chibnall Era, why I think it's good. I think it's only fair for me to dish out some criticisms. What the hell, guys? What's going on with the Next Time trailers? This is something that has bothered me since Series 11, Episode 2. I've been saying it and no one else listens because no one cares. But why are the Next Time trailers so ass? Over the years, I have become somewhat of a Next Time trailer connoisseur, a critic, if you will. And so I was disgusted at how bad they fumbled them in this era. Are you kidding me? Next Time trailers are an art form. I do not care. To me, they're one of, if not my favorite addition to the show in the modern series. I love the Next Time trailers. But this is my biggest problem with the era. I'm putting my foot down. What the hell, man? They piss me off. You let me down. They're not in sync with the music. They're way too fastly cut. The sound mixing is off. What the hell? It was so dire that I counted and there were only three Next Time trailers that I liked. 3, guys. In this whole era, out of 31 episodes, I think there's probably 28 Next Time trailers, and I only liked 3 of them. Now that is the real fumble. Are you kidding me? Next Time trailers are like the most important part. If you're wondering, the Next Time trailers that I liked are the one for Once Upon Time, the one for Eve of the Daleks, and the one for Power of the Doctor. Honorable mention, the one for Flux Part II. Every single other Next Time trailer, even for episodes that I liked, sucked. I don't know why, they're not in sync with the music. That's like the best part. If you know me, you know I love cliffhangers, and I genuinely think the Chibnall Era has some great ones. Overall, regardless of quality of episodes, the cliffhangers individually may be some of the best. We'll go over that in a little bit. But the Next Time trailers, how do you mess up the Next Time trailers? Yeah, whole era shit. Wrap it up, boys. But speaking of trailers, let's move on to the marketing, because the marketing for this era was a little strange. Let's start with the good. The trailer for Power of the Doctor, the Regenerations trailer, is probably one of the most hyped trailers they've ever done. That shit is fire. It goes the 50th anniversary trailer and then that trailer. I love that shit. It's a cold ass trailer, I'm just gonna say it. Not quite on that level, but the trailer for Series 13 was pretty cool. I remember really enjoying that when it came out. The Series 11 trailer, now that one was terrible. What they had like a pop song playing over it? Get that shit out of here, man. And the glass ceiling trailer, are we serious right now, bro? I can kind of understand why people went into Series 11 with bad faith when that was the marketing. I said that at the time as well, people. I'm remaining consistent. There were a few good Series 11 trailers though. There's that one where Graham's reading the Beano. I've always loved that one. And for Series 12, I think they forgot to market it. There was like one trailer. I was actually going through and rechecking all these trailers for the last video, and I watched this one. I like barely remembered it. I think I watched it once before, but the marketing for series 12 was just dog shit, man. The series started on New Year's Day with Spyfall Part 1, and most people I spoke to didn't even know if it was just a special coming out or the full series. That's a bad sign. A lot of people just dropped off after the first episode because they didn't realize there was more, which is crazy because that story ended on a cliffhanger. But I'm not gonna put the blame on the audience. Where were the adverts? I know you could do it. You did it for series 11. We took a year-long break for some reason just to come back with zero marketing. And don't even get me started on series 13. How the hell did that shit win an award? To give you an idea of how bad the marketing was for series 13, the companies that were making the annuals and the calendars and the merchandise had to get in touch with the BBC to release something because they had gone over their embargo date and hadn't released anything. We got like one trailer. I mean, at least it was a good trailer. But are you kidding me? Oh, we had a light show over Bristol, guys. No one remembers that but me. That's how they won the award, by the way. Viral marketing. Get out of here, man. We need posters, bro. Billboards. An advert on the telly. Anything, man. Jeez. I know they got it in them. They did it with series 11. Now, I understand first series, first season or whatever. New era, big push. But could we at least try and keep the hype train going? These one-year gaps between seasons did not help. Every single time Doctor Who has done this year-long gap, from 1985 to 2016 to 2019, every single time it flops massively. Doctor Who's gotta be on year by year, bros. We can't be taking a year, 2-year long break, come back like nothing happened and expect people to still be locked in. Time and time again, we've proven that doesn't work. But speaking of specials, let's talk about the Chibnall Era specials. The decision to move from Christmas to New Year's. I think we can all agree in retrospect that this was a misstep. Christmas is just better. Best holiday for a reason, bros. I kind of understand the appeal. Resolution, I think, did something pretty cool with the holiday. Revolution of the Daleks, that could have been a Christmas special. Eve of the Daleks, I suppose that tied in, but at the same time, man, why did we even move away? It was probably something to do with the BBC. Or maybe Chris Chibnall actually thought it was a good idea. Either way, I'm glad we're back at Christmas now. This is a weird hiccup. It's funny, because I do think that overall, a lot of the Christmas specials have been kind of ass, but they're endearing, you know, because they're on Christmas. In a similar sense, the New Year's Day specials are that same way. I actually think that all 3 episodes are pretty solid, with the weakest one probably being Revolution of the Daleks. The other 2 are pretty damn strong though, but it's funny, there's something just weird about them not being on Christmas. I think it was a neat experiment, but now we know the results. No hate for trying. But that kind of naturally leads us on to the next topic, which is the overall success of the era. There were a lot of bold choices, a lot of things that went in different directions, and was it a success? This is a really difficult question. I'm gonna break it down because there are a bunch of things that were being experimented with here. In fact, maybe the reason why some people hate it so vehemently is how drastic the changes were. A new head writer, a new doctor, a new cinematic style, a new soundtrack, a new format, a new series layout, new specials. Every single thing was new. And new does not mean better. New does also not mean bad though. We have to remember that. New is just different. Let's ask this question first. Was the female Doctor a success or failure? Do you think in the future we could see more female Doctors? Did Jodie Whittaker blast the door open, or did she seal it shut? Never again, so they say. I don't know, I'd like a female Doctor. I would actually really enjoy to see more Fugitive Doctor in the show. That's one of those things that was clearly very meant to be an important part of Series 13 that had to be dropped because of COVID. It's a really brilliant idea and one of the earliest ones in the Chibnall era. From what I heard, she was originally planned to be in Series 11. There were some misreports on that. Some people said she was one of the first ideas made up in the writer's room. Some people say that they wanted to implement her earlier but forced to later. Others say that she just came when she was planned. Either way, I like the idea of the character. Oh, actually, should I say that? I like the portrayal of the character. I feel like the idea itself could do with a little tweaking. I would say make her an alternate universe Doctor. I think that's the best way to handle it, me personally. But from Joe Martin's portrayal to the idea of her being a more Time Lord mission-centric subterfuge Doctor, a literal secret version of the Doctor and not one that's just a secret from himself for some reason in the War Doctor. I think I prefer the idea of the fugitive Doctor to the War Doctor. The War Doctor, of course, was made out of necessity because Chris Eccleston couldn't show up. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, but whatever, man, who cares? The fugitive Doctor, however, as an incarnation of the Doctor who was hidden. Now that is pretty cool. Some people like to slur into the season 6B stuff. I think I personally prefer the alternate universe idea. I think that would just be so clean. They were really setting up multiverse hard, by the way. By the end of Flux, by the end of the specials, going into the 60th anniversary, there was such a massive, easy opportunity to go into the multiverse. It was practically begging. But we didn't take it, and that's fine. I guess not the direction we decided to go in. Maybe another day. But basically, I like the fugitive Doctor. And I like Jodie Whittaker too. I would like to see more female Doctors, although I will always say just hire the people who are best for the job or will fit the vision the most. The audition script for the 15th Doctor was released by Rusty Davies, and if there was ever any doubt why Ncuti Gatwa was cast, it's gone with that, because it honestly feels like that script was written for him. It's impossible to read that script not in his voice, which is crazy because of course it wasn't written for him. Now you could have some complaints with how that audition script was written. Maybe you'd say, oh, I wouldn't want the Doctor to speak like that, but guess what, you're not in charge. It's Rusty Davies' vision. This is his idea of what he wants the 15th Doctor to be, and Ncuti Gatwa embodies that perfectly. So that's what I'm talking about, by the way, when I mean perfect fit. Yes, in the history of cinema there have been better actors than Ncuti Gatwa, but for the 15th Doctor he is the perfect casting, in a similar way to how I feel like every Doctor is perfectly cast. I love them, and I love them all, and I always love them the moment that they're cast as well. There was never any doubt for me with any of the modern Doctors. Oh, is this guy gonna be good? I knew I'd love him. Again, this is something that makes me differ from most audiences. Something I hear thrown around a lot is, this is the moment where blank became the Doctor. I have never had an experience like that. For me, blank becomes the Doctor the moment they're cast. They are just Doctor Who, I accept it. And it's not like I'm forcing myself to either. It just happens. So yes, I will say that the idea of the female Doctor was a success. But was the era a success? I'm gonna say maybe. There are definitely arguments for and against. The arguments for are pretty simple. It succeeded in its job as being a bridge from the previous era to the one that we currently have. It served its purpose as 30 competently made stories, for the most part. I enjoyed it. There's another one. But on the other hand, there are a few arguments against, and not all of them are terrible. I think the major one would be the schism in the fandom that occurred around the Timeless Child. People were clearly very unhappy with that. But the main point that I want to get on is the decline in cultural dominance. Because I think if we boil it down, this is the main deciding factor as to why some people don't like this era. When Doctor Who came back in 2005, it was a juggernaut. You would see action figures everywhere, annuals, toys, comic books. And while there is still merchandise today, it very clearly isn't as front and center as it was, say, 15 years ago. And I actually experienced this decline in real time. I remember the exact episode where everyone who I knew in real life had stopped watching the show. Everyone was watching it with me concurrently. I remembered I'd talked with people after the episodes aired, and the last episode where that happened was Robot of Sherwood in Series 8. I don't really know what happened. People just stopped watching after that. And it wasn't like that episode was so terrible that everyone stopped watching. In fact, when I spoke to people about it, and this was the last time I spoke to people who stopped watching shortly after, they all enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it. I think it's a fun episode. But for some reason, people just kind of stopped caring, and Doctor Who faded into obscurity. Relative obscurity. Of course, people like me were still keeping it alive, but people have been making these Doctor Who is dead posts basically ever since 2014. But there was a chance. With Series 11, there was a chance to reinvigorate the show. But what did they do? They took a year-long break, the assholes. But yeah, Doctor Who isn't as popular now. I've made a video before, a 40-minute video, by the way, talking about ratings in Doctor Who. The history of it, stretching across the entire 60 years. And keep in mind, while I say this, I am not specifically talking about that. I'm talking about the cultural dominance of the show, more so outside of the show itself. Are people talking about it? Is it still mainstream? Is it as as popular as it was in, say, 2007. And sadly, it is not. The days of walking into Toys R Us and seeing the whole Doctor Who exhibit are over. And that is sad, but it's also inevitable. The reason you can't walk into Toys R Us and see all of that anymore is because Toys R Us doesn't exist anymore. They're all gone. Sometimes you might see some old signs, a relic of a bygone age, but life just isn't the same as it was 15 years ago. Entropy affects everything, including TV shows. This was a big point I made in my ratings video, but nothing can last forever. Even by the end of Tom Baker's run, things had been getting pretty dire. But that's the thing about Doctor Who. It constantly regenerates, reinvigorates itself. Sometimes it can take a wrong turn, but it will always bounce back. The golden age of Doctor Who passed a long time ago. If you think it was 2008, you're crazy. The golden age of Doctor Who was in the 70s. It never reached that height again. And in fact, a lot of the references to Doctor Who are still to that 70s era of the show because it is that influential and impactful. But we saw resurgences in the 80s, in the 2000s, in the 2010s even. And who knows, we might even see one again soon. You know I love Doctor Who, I'm always praying on it doing well. And I'm sure it will. Now that I've talked about the cultural side of things, let's talk strictly ratings. Let's talk the numbers, guys. I think a big problem when going into the ratings discussion is that some people just don't know how they work. Some people think that the BBC have the ability to massage the numbers. That's something I've seen been going around quite a lot. Someone said that Doctor Who magazine massaged the numbers, as if Doctor Who magazine can do that. You do realise that Doctor Who magazine and Doctor Who are separate. Additionally, the BBC are forced by law to release their figures. They can't lie. Another misconception that people have is that Doctor Who was getting 20 million viewers at any point in history. The highest rated episode was City of Death, with 16 million. And keep in mind, this was in the 70s when there were only like 3 channels. And because there was a strike, 2 of them were down. And it was because of that strike that Doctor Who was able to reach those incredible mind-blowing figures. In the 21st century, Doctor Who was not at a consistent 20 million. Hell, Doctor Who wasn't even at a consistent 10 million. In 2008, Rusty Davies said that they were averaging 8 million. That's the peak. Of course, there were certain episodes that went over that, and of course there were certain episodes that went under that. And the idea that ratings equal quality, or even that ratings equal cultural significance, are clearly bogus. Now let's jump ahead to Series 11. I have been aching to talk about this series and its ratings for a long time, but let's just dive right in. The Woman Who Fell to Earth premiered at 10 million viewers. Jesus, that is very good. The follow-up, 9 million. And then, as we see as the series progresses, the numbers slowly go down until the finale, The Battle of Ranskoor Avkolos, an episode which I am not personally a fan of, but you know we move, concludes at a respectable 6.65. Now, if we compare this to Series 1, you may notice it's the exact same trajectory. The episodes finish at around the same figures as well. And also you may have noticed that The Battle of Ranskoor Avkolos got a higher figure than both Blink and Silence in the Library. Ratings equals quality copers are in the mud. If that doesn't prove to you that ratings don't equal quality, I don't know what will. Blink is the least watched episode of Series 3, with less ratings than The Battle of Ranskoor Avkolos. Do you think that these numbers might be meaningless now? I mean, look at that. Silence in the Library got under it as well. That's just dumb. Ratings do not equal quality, guys. And remember, of course, ratings are relative. What was once incredibly bad is now pretty good. Take in point the Christmas special ratings for this latest episode. The Church on Ruby Road. This came out 10 years ago, we would call it an incredible underperformance. Right now, it's the most viewed show of the day. I mean, that's just crazy. It's a really dense topic, and I go over it in incredible detail in my 40-minute video, so you should definitely check that out if you're interested in that conversation. But on the topic of success, I suppose we should look at the numbers and see for ourselves. I think Series 11 was a success, we can just skip over that one. Series 12 is where things get a bit more interesting. It's funny because Series 11 actually maps on pretty identically with the trajectory of Series 1, 5 and 8, which were all the first series of an individual Doctor. But let's take a step back because I'm about to blow your mind here, guys. Series 5, Matt Smith, my fraud. Let's look at his numbers. 10 million start. Very good, very nice, massive success. 6 million finish. Slow and natural decline till the end. It's almost like every time they introduce a new Doctor Who, there's a massive marketing push, they get big numbers, and then it naturally goes down over time. And similarly, Series 12 maps on practically identically to the trajectory of Series 9. Now, it gets a little weird here trying to compare between series because, of course, Series 2 is David Tennant's first series, so it's not the second series of a Doctor. And Series 6 is also difficult because it has a break midway before, so of course everything's fluctuating, going up, down, up, down. So I'm just going with Series 9. Keep in mind that in this era of television, everything is going down. People are watching Netflix, they're watching YouTube. And so when you compare it to that, all things considered, Series 12 feels pretty standard. However, there is something that I will call into account and something that I will put forward, in my opinion, as a failure. I think most episodes of Series 12 pass the vibe check rating wise, but the one I think that really lets itself down is the finale. Series 12 episode 10, The Timeless Children underperformed. I'm just gonna say it, with all the hype going on around it, and there was a little bit of a marketing push, although not really, and all the word of mouth especially, you would have expected this one to do a bit better, and it just didn't. Every single other episode of this series did at least somewhat well, and this one did not. Remember what I said about certain episodes mattering more than others? If an episode like Orphan 55 got record low ratings or whatever, who really cares? But when an episode like the Series 12 finale, which had a massive buzz online, didn't do well then, just a bit of a bad look, isn't it? Series 13 matches on with Series 10. Rating wise there, those are mostly identical. And then we go on to the specials, and to the second episode, which I think underperformed, which is Legend of the Sea Devils, and it deserves it. There was no marketing, there was no nothing, because this episode is nothing. Yeah, I'll say this episode is a flop. It did poorly, it deserved to do poorly. As I said earlier, it probably shouldn't have been made. But outside of that, pretty much everything else did pretty well. Ratings wise, I'm gonna give this era a 6 out of 10. You passed. Barely. And I think that's the same way I would assess the era as a whole. It was a lot quieter. If you're in the fandom, you can attest to this. Stephen Moffat and especially Rusty Davies are way more bombastic in their showrunner styles, which is definitely not the norm in television. Most other shows, people wouldn't be able to tell you the showrunners' names, and yet with Doctor Who, they're practically headlining. Their personalities are bringing people in, and they had stuff on the side like Doctor Who Confidential and the spin-offs in the Rusty Davies era. I suppose in the Stephen Moffat era as well, but we won't talk about that. Confidential came to an end in 2013, but it's back now in the form of Doctor Who Unleashed, and I like it, even if it is a little bit diluted. Doctor Who Confidential is really fun, and it is a shame that there isn't that level of insight to the behind the scenes in the Chibnall era, because I would be so interested. I would be so interested in talking with Chris Chibnall. If anyone is watching this video and they know Chris Chibnall, or if Chris Chibnall, if you're watching this video, hit me up, man. Let's see if we can make it happen. But yeah, there wasn't really a lot outside the show. There were a few Doctor Who experiences. What are they called? Not mystery rooms, escape rooms. That's what I'm trying to say. There was some stuff like that. There was a VR game. I think there were 2 VR games. And there were the Doctor Who lockdown stuff, but I wouldn't really consider that Chibnall era because that was just fans more so. It was quite radio silent outside of the show itself. And I do think that was to its detriment. I love the engagement that the show has with its fans. And I think everyone else in the fandom does too. Chris Chibnall being so quiet and secretive, and I know it's in his nature, which is fine, does take a few points off the success of the era as a whole. It would have been great to have more content, but still overall, I think it was a partial success. Boom. Which leads me on to my overall thoughts. What are my overall thoughts on the era? You can presume they're positive, but let's get into the nitty gritty. I think Series 11 is good. I think it's a good series. Move that out of the way. I spoke about that enough. Series 12 is one I'm a little bit more critical of. I've said this 1,000 times, but I think the Timeless Child twist is a little strange. With a few tweaks, it could be good. As it stands, it's whatever. Yeah, I get what he's going for. Yeah, it's not all bad. Yeah, a lot of the people who say they hate it have valid reasons to do so. But it isn't just that, it's more so the structure of the series in general and the decision to have 5 lore in quotation marks episodes and 5 filler in quotation marks episodes. Because by all accounts, the filler episodes are quite enjoyable. I like Praxius, I like Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror. Orphan 55, And Can You Hear Me is a bit weird because there's some stuff in there that I do like, but overall I think it lets itself down with some of the editing towards the end. But most of the episodes in the series individually are quite enjoyable. The problem is that the series arc is what people actually care about. I think it would have been to the series' benefit if the whole thing was tied into the series arc and there weren't certain episodes that were really tied in and certain episodes that weren't tied in at all. Like Fugitive of the Jadoon, for example. Great episode, really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed it on first watch too. But it's really tied into the series arc. Outside of that, there isn't really a lot there, which has caused some people to say, oh well, if you take away the series arc, then there isn't really a lot there. But of course, that's the point of the episode. The point of the episode is to be shocking, shock value, oh my goodness, what's going on? And so yeah, obviously if you say, well, if you take away all the shock value and all the good stuff, then it's going to be bad. But that's not really a fair criticism. I do understand where they're coming from though. I briefly mentioned this earlier, there was definitely a clear step backwards from Series 11. Series 11 is very bold, very confident in itself, brave even. Series 12 is a lot more, oh, we tried something too different, guys. We're gonna go back to the old basics, which is end of the universe, story arcs, Captain Jack Harkness, Rusty Davies everywhere. And Series 12 does feel like that. It feels like Rusty Davies written by Chris Chibnall. Whereas what Chris Chibnall should be trying to do is Chris Chibnall written by Chris Chibnall. He should be trying to do his own thing. There are certain episodes in there that I really like. I really like Spyfall, for example. I like Spyfall Part 1 especially. As I mentioned, Nikola Tesla Night of Terror, I think that's a really fun episode. And the finale in and of itself is actually pretty good. But overall, I think I would rank it a little lower than Series 11 and around on the same level as Series 9, which I did also really enjoy. And Series 13, well, that one's just really near and dear to my heart. Being real, it's probably towards the bottom of Doctor Who series, quality-wise, if you care about that. Who gives a shit, am I right? I judge based on vibes. Now, but being serious, it probably is towards the bottom, but I enjoy it a lot so much that I don't really care. And I think there are some people with me who will admit that enjoyment-wise, it is pretty damn fun. Maybe even more fun than the first two Chibnall series. And so I probably put that one a little lower, below Series 12 as well, but enjoyment-wise, it's way above Series 12. Does that make sense? And Power of the Doctor is a massive W. So that's a good note to end on. And overall, I like it. I wish there had been more content. I wish there had been some more spin-off stuff. I wish Series 13 was able to come out in its real form. But overall, I'm satisfied. I will cherish the memories of watching this era as it came out forever, as it quickly fades into the past to be remembered only as a previous era of Doctor Who. Sandwiched between two presumably far more expansive visions of the show. But speaking of which, let's talk about it. Let's do the battle of the showrunners. Which is my favorite? Which era is my favorite? Let's talk about it. Now, I don't really want to give ratings to eras of Doctor Who. I like them all and I like them all for different reasons, but I'm not going to pretend like I don't have favorites. Come on, man, you know me. When judging an episode, and especially when judging an era, there are many things one has to consider, and something that rarely gets touched on is the secret factor, the X factor, ingredient X. Now, a lot of people might not know what I'm talking about because it is rather a nebulous concept, but I'm here to tell you guys, there is always something that sets that thing that's special out from the rest. Something which usually you can't even put into words. It's just a feeling, the vibes, some people call it, but I like to call it the sauce, otherwise known as swag. This is something I internally use to determine whether or not I enjoy an episode. I ask myself the question, does it have the sauce? It's an air of confidence around itself, certainty. Is it cool in a way which I can't really describe in words? A lot of you might not follow exactly what I'm saying, but you get the meaning. When I watch an episode, when I watch an era, I ask myself, does it have the sauce? And it is this factor which sets the Chibnall era and the Moffat era and the Rusty Davies era apart. Because there are certain parts of each which I think do have the sauce, and there are certain parts of each which I think do not. But of course, not all eras are born equal. The Chibnall era is of course the smallest, with only one Doctor Who and only 31 episodes. The Rusty Davies era has practically a whole other series and a half on top of that, with another Doctor. With the Moffat era, it isn't even close. He practically has a whole other era on top of the Chibnall era. That's how many episodes he made. And of course, with so many more episodes episodes, I think Stephen Moffat has probably the most flops. But on the other side of things, I think he has the most bangers too. You really didn't know what you were getting into. Sometimes you go into the worst episode ever made, sometimes you go into the best episode ever made. It was really just depending on the day. The Chibnall Era is a lot more consistent, with not as many smash out of the parks, but not as many just borderline completely unwatchable episodes. There are a few in there though. But if we're talking about consistency, I think Rusty Davies is king. With not only one show, but 2 spin-offs as well. Pretty much all resting at a similar level of relative quality. Yes, Series 2 kind of lets the side down a little bit, but it's not all bad. It has its good moments. Series 1 is a banger throughout, Series 3 is a banger throughout, Series 4 is a banger throughout. Specials are all fun, even when they're shit. But in the words of Claire from The Haunting of Villa Diodati, would you trade exciting for reliable and dull? And that is why I picked the Moffat era as my favourite. I'm gonna rank them like this. I'm gonna say Stephen Moffat at top, I'm gonna put Rusty Davies at 2, and I'm gonna put Chris Chibnall at 3. I love them all, but that's my personal rating. Out of the modern era, I think Stephen Moffat is up there as one of, if not my favourite writer. I love his work. Even in the bad episodes, I think there are good moments. But it is very clear when he's just phoning it in. Can't hate though, I do the exact same thing. And he is just so funny. Even in shows that are not Doctor Who, even in real life, the guy is hilarious. I could watch him all day. So yeah, that is my overall ranking of the eras. I like them all, but Stephen Moffat goes up top, Rusty Davies at number 2, and Chris Chibnall at number 3. It's really interesting though, because when you take a step out of the Modern Who lens and step back and judge them all as eras of Doctor Who, I would put all 3 of them pretty much towards the bottom. I think the bottom 4 eras are the Stephen Moffat era, the Rusty Davies era, the Chibnall era, and then probably the 7th Doctor's era, or the mid 6th to 7th Doctor's era. Season 23 to 24, that's what I'm saying. Outside of that, I feel like everything in the classic show far exceeds anything in the modern era. It's actually night and day when you go to a Hinchcliffe Homes and you watch it right after a Rusty Davies, for example. They're just not even close. So it does get funny for me seeing the bickering between Modern Who fans, when being real guys, you guys haven't even watched the real show.
That whole medley though was amazing. Well, I looked across at both of you and we were all like, oh, that's 5 Doctors, or the Daleks, or Tomb of the Cybermen.
I like the running through Paris one from City of Death.
Yes, yeah.
There we go. That's because we don't really think modern Doctor Who counts. I'm sorry. None of us do.
That's what you made up.
We are just like, that's just nonsense. That's like fan fiction.
True! And it really isn't. Like, the Chibnall era is just complete dog shit. It's irrelevant. Now, there's plenty of stuff that the era does well that the other 2 don't. Again, the Chibnall era really does excel in that 80s Doctor Who feel. Something which puts me right at home. There is a massive overlap between people who don't like 80s Doctor Who and people who don't like the Chibnall era though. It's funny how history kind of keeps repeating itself. Maybe there could be a video there. That's interesting. Something the Chibnall era is also really good at is its treatment of past villains. The Master, the Cybermen, Daleks, the Sontarans, they're all done perfectly. I couldn't ask for more. Whereas Stephen Moffat, even though it is my favourite era, he very clearly hated the Daleks. He said multiple times he doesn't really care for them. He's also said he thinks the Master is incredibly lame, which is definitely very obvious to see. And although it seems that he loves the Cybermen, episodes like Closing Time, Nightmare in Silver, Death in Heaven, it seems he only really got a chance to enjoy playing with them in his final story. The Sontarans don't even make a real appearance. They're in Time with the Doctor, and then there's Strax. Russell T Davies, he did the Daleks incredibly. I don't even need to say that. Bro gets them, and I love him for it. The Cybermen is a little bit more iffy, but you know what, sure. Sontarans, But Master, ding, you got it. But do you see what I mean? Each showrunner excels at different things, but now for something completely different. Then again, this leads back to what I was saying before about different mindsets when it comes to viewing the show. A lot of people like Doctor Who, and a lot of people like Doctor Who for different reasons. I definitely know I like Doctor Who for my own set of reasons that are different from, say, why someone else who got really invested in Series 2 and the Doctor and Rose's romance, why might they enjoy Doctor Who? I feel like our motivations might not cleanly fit in with one another. And I feel like that's good. I feel like that should be celebrated. The fact that there's so much variety in Doctor Who, that so many different people can like it for so many different reasons. We're seeing a new approach with it in the Rusty Davies 2 era, where a larger focus will be put on fantasy and magic, rather than the hard sci-fi of previous years. The hard sci-fi being episodes like the Shakespeare Code. Why do I keep mentioning that one? Either way, some people love Doctor Who for the romance, some people like Doctor Who for the world, some people like Doctor Who for the monsters, and some people like Doctor Who for David Tennant, I suppose. Either way, I think when it comes down to the general popularity of the Chibnall Era, let's say, there's a big difference in why people like me enjoy episodes of Doctor Who and why other people might also enjoy episodes of Doctor Who. Some people might enjoy episodes of Doctor Who because they binge watched it in a rough time and they got through all of them and there was a similar feel and it was a comfort show or whatever, and it sent them through ups and downs of emotional turmoil, and it's wacky and charming and there isn't really a show like it. And then you get to the Chibnall Era and it doesn't even feel like Doctor Who anymore because it's so different. But of course it does feel like Doctor Who, but it feels like the Doctor Who of the time where you weren't watching, aka the 80s. Again, Series 11 is very quite different from the rest of the modern show. But then again, you've got to remember that for me, the modern show is very different to the rest of the classic show. And so I'm used to there being massive clashes in different eras of the show and stuff being totally different from one another, aka the first Doctor's era is totally different from the fourth, which is totally different from the third Doctor's era, which is totally different from the sixth Doctor's era. And so what I do is I can jump around from all three of them like a leapfrog, bouncing around, enjoying all of them, and never getting burnt out because they all feel so fresh. The Chibnall Era fits right into that for me. If it was exactly the same as all the other eras, it would kind of mesh, blend together. The Chibnall Era is good, but it's good in different ways to other eras of Doctor Who. It's weaker in other ways. I would say that the world building of the Rusty Davies era is its main selling point, and that is absent in the Chibnall Era. It's also absent in the Moffat era, but the Moffat era excels in these sci-fi monster concepts, the grand series arcs, the mysteries, and the Chibnall Era, specifically Series 11, feels so good to me because it feels so much more real. The characters act so totally different to how they did in previous eras. They would be a lot more over-exaggerated, and each of their traits would be kind of like a move in a video game that they would use on cooldown. Whereas the characters in Series 11 just feel like regular people. There is no impossible girl gimmick. There is no, you were the most important person in the universe, Ryan. No, Ryan is just a kid. Graham is his granddad, and Yaz is just a probationer. They're along for the ride. They've been whisked up into this adventure. It's a different approach, but it is appreciated, at least for me. A lot of people, especially with Ryan, call out the fact that his dyspraxia isn't mentioned every single second of every episode. People even use the fact that in the episode The Ghost Monument, he can shoot people with a gun because he plays video games as being evidence that he's not dyspraxic. Of course, dyspraxia affects people in different ways. Some people with dyspraxia can ride a bike, for example. Overall, that part of him is not defining. It doesn't need to come up every episode because it's just something that is. He doesn't go into a room and says, "Hi, my name's Ryan, I'm dyspraxic." And I don't think he should need to. Forgive the rant, I just wanted to get that off my chest. I think the main underlying point is that people like Doctor Who for different reasons. And that's why everyone has such different tastes. People got mad at me for saying this in the last video, but it just is an objective fact, which is that no one in the Doctor Who fandom can agree on anything. And that's good. The amount of times I've seen someone try and say on a forum or in a YouTube video or in a YouTube comment or whatever, is there one thing that we can all agree on? And then people will comment their opinions like, Midnight is a great episode, or Heaven Sent is the best episode ever, or something like that. And it's funny because every time without fail, you would see someone coming out of the woodwork to say, actually, I disagree with that, or actually, I don't think that. I think season 24 is bad, and then someone would come and say, actually, I think season 24 is good, or I don't like Heaven Sent, or I don't like Midnight, or blah, blah, blah. There's always going to be people who disagree. The fandom consensus is not absolute, and that is amazing, because if it was, I would cry. I love talking with people who disagree. I love talking with people who have their own unique opinions. I love talking with people who don't just copy what other people say and then repeat it back verbatim. I don't like people who have been told that they're not meant to like something, so go into an episode in the most bad faith possible and then come out with a bullshit criticism like, the TARDIS didn't land where it was supposed to, as if that is an episode ruining criticism and not just a part of the show. I think what's funny is that I got a comment on my previous video saying, well, everyone agrees Heaven Sent is the best. It's just, My poor sweet summer child. It's ironic because while researching that video, I literally found an article from The Independent where they said Heaven Sent was a load of crap. So clearly not everyone agrees with this assessment, and nor should they have to. And even then I can still imagine what other people might think, because I'm not so brainwashed into thinking that there is only one correct opinion on an episode. But anyway, I think that's my overall point. Everyone sees Doctor Who differently. There's a little something for everyone. Trademark. And I like the Chibnall Era. I think it's fun. Does it have problems? Yes, every era has problems though, so I don't even know why I need to say that. And if you disagree, leave it in the comments below. Preferably without saying because it has bad writing. And that's the video. I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. This one went on for kind of a while, didn't it? Either way, I hope you enjoyed. And if you want to help support the channel, you can click the join button below to gain access to a multitude of perks and benefits, including access to the new weekly show where I go over every episode of Doctor Who I watched within the week and give my thoughts on them. And you can also join the Discord server too. A massive thanks to the members: Teddy Bite, Just Tim, Lee, Kastretch, Architect, Rouge Argentine, Zach Pollock, Ertle the Turtle, Tom, Oz Baxter, Manny, Lahar S, Someone's Best Friend, Stephen Folden, Connor Bell, Snarly, Kyle Reese, Colin Savage, Sanyu, Casual Log, and Eric is Waiting. Additionally, I want to give a massive thanks to Teddy Bite. All of the footage used in this video of the gameplay, Lego Dimensions, the Doctor Who stuff, you've been watching it for the past hour or so, all of that was recorded by him, and most of it was recorded live on the Discord server. And while I wasn't able to catch all of it, for what I did manage to see, it was amazing and massively appreciated. Thank you so much, man. And with all that said, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.